Yep. Oh.
Anybody can do it. Anybody can do it, it's you. And there's no motions for us to mess up. I had to try to type as well as dictate, so
Right.
that helps. All right, I'm going to call to order the City Commission study session of Monday, March 9th. All please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
As always, we begin by acknowledging the land on which we gather is the territory of the Ottawa and Chippewa peoples who have stewarded this land through the generations. Thank you for your strength and resilience in protecting this land and inspiring us to uphold our responsibilities to do the same. With that, I'm going to start, Sarah tonight is going to be acting in a dual role, so we'll be going back and forth to her and welcome everybody, or thank everyone for their patience. So I'll have you start with a roll call.
Sure. Commissioner Funk?
Here.
Commissioner Shaw? Here. Commissioner Bomer?
Here.
Commissioner Treadwell?
Here.
Commissioner Anderson?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Ness?
Here.
Mayor?
Here. And then I am going to pass it off, or do you need a minute? I'm going to pass it off to Sarah. We've had a lot going on as a city this week, so I'm going to just let her speak to that a little before we start the meeting.
Great. So as many of you are aware, Deputy City Manager Deb Allen has experienced a family tragedy and will be away from the office for an undetermined amount of time. We all extend our condolences to Deb and her family. In addition, City Manager Marintet is out of town on vacation and then will be attending the National League of City Conferences in Washington, D.C. next week. So in the interim, I will be serving as acting City Manager until his return. So 2 hats tonight. I'm the clerk and acting City Manager. Meetings scheduled for this week are the City Commission ad hoc interview for Complete Streets meetings. There are 2. We'll meet on Tuesday, March 10th at noon and Thursday, March 12th at noon in the second floor manager's office conference room. And the Parks and Rec Commission will meet Thursday, March 12th at 6:30 here in the chambers.
All right, and do you have any city manager notes to pass on?
That was all in one.
Thank you for that. And thank you everyone for joining us on this beautiful evening as the last of our first fall springs is drawing to a close from the forecast. So with that, we will kick off our study session for tonight with a presentation on wastewater treatment from Art Krieger. So come on down.
I'm actually just going to introduce Mark briefly.
Great.
Mark's going to give the presentation. Art Krieger, Director of Utilities with the city. If you're not aware, I just wanted to make it clear, we have a regional wastewater treatment plant, which is great, and we have 6 townships and the city's wastewater that comes to our plant here in the city. The facility is owned by the city, but we have our township partners. We have a master sewer agreement to quantify how that relationship works. And it's been going pretty well. It was redone in 2017 as far as the agreement, and talks about capacity, and that's what this first presentation is going to be. The wastewater treatment plant capacity, and then item 2 is also with the wastewater plant, but we'll get there next.
Okay, great.
So I'm going to introduce to you Mark Huggard from Jacobs. It's kind of a running joke at the BPW meetings. They call him Mark Jacobs, but I fell for it. Mark Huggard with Jacobs. He's a project manager there, and he's going to provide this capacity overview for you.
Great, thank you. And don't forget, you can yell at us, Mark, like your kids.
I'm going to work on this tonight, so if I am not loud enough, just yell at me. Okay, thank you, everyone. So tonight, I just want to take a few minutes to go over what the treatment plant's capacity is as far as looking at flow and organic loading capacities at the treatment plant, so where we stand currently. We'll highlight some of the trends on each of those parameters, and then I'll take a brief look at, like Art had mentioned, the township and city-owned capacities and where they are according to the MSA agreement, and then just talk briefly about some recommendations for the future. So, switch between a couple here. So we have a couple of different there are 2 design limits associated with the flow. So I don't want to confuse those. So the plant is designed for a maximum monthly average flow of 8.5 MGD and a peak hour flow of 17 MGD. So those are completely different numbers. The 8.5 MGD is again, it's a max monthly flow that the plant can sustain and treat the wastewater at the concentrations that it was designed to treat. The peak hour flow is a 17 million gallons per day. That's what they generally refer to as hydraulic capacity. So that's what can we take into the plant on a heavy rain event during Cherry Festival during the middle of the day without overflowing the tanks, and that's what your hydraulic capacity is. So the plant can handle 17 MGD over an hour, and we're not going to be going through that analysis on the peak hour. We're going to stick to just the monthly max, but I wanted to just explain that difference there. The other parameter we're going to look at is loading, so organic loading. So we measure organic loading using a test called BOD, or biochemical oxygen demand, and all that is we're just see how much oxygen demand is on that water, and that tells us how strong that wastewater is. So it's commonly referred to as the strength of wastewater. The wastewater treatment plant was designed to handle up to 20,200 pounds of BOD per day. This is based on that 8.5 MGD flow. While we monitor other nutrients as well, like ammonia, phosphorus, and all those, again, we'll be sticking to just going over the main one, which is organic loading. Organic loading draws the highest oxygen demand in the plant, so that's usually the most critical one for design. Touching on just what Eagle's recommendations are for planning, there is no set in stone number you have to reach before you need to upgrade or anything. They provide this guideline of 80%. So if the plant reaches 80% of capacity, they recommend that's when you begin planning for expansion, or at least doing capacity analysis and figure out what you need to do in the future. Once you hit that 90% capacity, that's when you should be applying for permits and beginning construction for expansion. Again, these are guidelines.
Can I ask a quick question, Mark,
yes.
about that?
Go ahead.
Just because I think, first of all, we sometimes kind of hear people hear 80 and then they think that's the max, and so I appreciate you clarifying that.
Sure.
So it's a 10% difference between these two numbers. What is kind of worst case scenarios in professional experience of you hit that 80% and you have to start planning? Realistically, barring an entire city being built on top of a city that's already there,
Right.
how long with most average growth does that 10% take to hit? Like, would it be this is now a 5-year plan, this is now a 10-year
Right.
plan?
That's a great question, and I will touch on that a little bit later.
Oh, sorry.
But it does, to answer that and briefly, is you pretty much would need to know what is the growth rate, because that matters. If it's, typically it would take years to get to that point, but if you're growing exponentially year over year, that changes things. So that would be part of a facility plan and doing a full capacity study.
But we haven't seen growth like that in our area, in Traverse City. That would
not that
get
I
those
mean,
numbers that we've seen so far, I should say.
right. We've seen a lot of growth. I'll say we've seen a lot more growth in the last few years than what we
Right.
have in the past. But yeah, that would be best done in a full capacity study.
Okay, great, thank you.
Just a real quick question, kind of to piggyback on yours. When we start talking about capacity, we've been talking about the membrane train replacements, and I wondered if by adding a membrane train, it would reduce the amount of stress on the existing ones and would get more life out of them. Does adding a membrane train increase the capacity?
The cost of doing okay, that's a couple parts there. The plant is designed to handle there's space for more capacity with membranes. There's empty slots to add more membranes for additional capacity. But the cost of doing that when it's not needed at this time, it
Right.
doesn't make sense.
Right.
But it is there, and would be something to be looked at in capacity plan or
Right.
study.
Is the membrane train just one element of the total capacity? So we couldn't just add a membrane train and increase our capacity? Or is
There's a whole lot you have to look at
That's what I
beyond
thought.
that, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Sorry to derail you.
Nope,
Yes,
you're-
thank you,
you're
Mark. We
good.
appreciate
You're
you.
good. These are all good questions. All right. So here's a monthly flow capacity comparison. So you look at the upper that turquoise line there, you see that that's the 8.5 MGD design capacity for the monthly maximum flow. The lower green lines, the 80% threshold for planning that we use, and that's around 6.8 MGD. The gray columns there, that's our max monthly average flow for that given year, and this is in the calendar year. And that typically occurs in July or August around, Cherry Festival and busiest time of the year. And you'll see we had a couple peaks in 2015, 2020, where we actually touched or just barely exceeded that 80%, and then it kind of drops right back off after that. We can associate those with, we had the high lake levels, we had a lot of I&I, heavy rain events, especially around 2019, 2020, so that's what you see in there. But the good thing is the facility is consistently remaining below that threshold, except for those couple peaks. And there's no sustained upward trend in flows, which is good to see. And right now, our current capacity for 2025, if you're looking at, I think it was July was our highest month, we were about 62% capacity. Just for reference, the annual average daily flow in the plant, if you look at the whole year and average that flow, we're at about 4.4 million gallons per day, so just over 50% capacity.
Mark, I have a quick question.
Yes.
So for the Eagle requirement of the 80% capacity, when is that triggered? So for instance, in 2020, we hit it, in 2015, we hit it. Is it over what period of time?
I'm sorry.
What period of time does it?
If we saw a sustained trend of that,
Okay.
and it was constant and multiple months were exceeding and we were continuing to rise, then I would think that would be if you're hitting that multiple times. We know the cause of that at that time.
Okay.
The high lake levels, the I&I, the city's obviously been addressing a lot of I&I with lining pipes and such, so we can control that. We see that was definitely the issue there.
So do we respond to Eagle with that
No.
when we hit it, or is it just a kind of an ongoing
We just
audit?
track it.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So,
Nope.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It seemed to be, in that last slide, sort of a wave pattern with peaks in 2015 and 2020. I
Sure.
wondered if you went back further before 2015, are there external factors? Do you see that same pattern of peaks and valleys?
I would
Any-
assume we would. I did not go back that far. I certainly can if you want me to, but I didn't go back to that.
And you mentioned high water levels as being one
Yes.
factor. Anything else that jumps out as a,
The heavy rain events
heavy rain
themselves.
events.
Yeah.
okay,
And
thanks.
2015 had that huge storm that
Yeah.
hit both counties really hard, yeah.
Yep.
So this trend here is just showing the monthly organic loading maximum organic loading capacity comparison of the plant. So the upper gray line here is our 20,200 pounds per day design capacity for loading. The lower blue line is the 80% threshold. You can see that the plant is well below that, running around 60% was the peak month in 2025. The one thing to point out here, though, you can see from 2020 on, there's a pretty consistent rise in that loading. So that's something we want to keep an eye on. And if that continues, this kind of goes back to what Laura was asking. If that trend continues and we're moving up and we can, a little faster than we like, then that would trigger us doing a deeper dive into this capacity analysis. Okay.
I have a question here.
Yep.
It looks to me from the data that it's the townships that are really contributing to this BOD loading. And we don't have a problem right now. It seems like everybody's within their allocations, but it could be a problem in the future. And when do
Sure.
we decide that this is that we're in the future? And because the city is pretty stable, it's not moving around very much, but the township,
Sure.
it's increasing. So when do we decide that we need to start planning? And how are you thinking about this while you're also thinking about the master sewer agreement that you're working on?
Well, that's all right. Yeah, maybe just a second. I do touch on that, and I will go over the MSA as far as where we're stand with the city and the townships against the MSA capacities. But I would suggest, and what I'll suggest later in here is that as part of a facility plan, because there's portions of the treatment plant right now that are older and have not been upgraded, so we're doing a big upgrade now. That's more of the headworks of the plant. And then we did the membranes back in 2004. But there's other processes that are more biological, like anaerobic digestion, activated sludge. All those processes work together, and they should be evaluated together, and it would be done through a facility plan, so we have a nice detailed capital improvement plan going forward to address those. So part of that would be collaborating with the townships, collaborating with the county, and figuring out the full capacity of the system as a whole, and going over as well the loadings from the townships and everything else.
So would this be part of like a regional facilities kind of planning group that we sort of are thinking about working on?
It's, oh, sorry, Art, did you want to say something? Because I was going to say something too real quick, but go ahead.
I was just going to say, we did add it to the CIP for next year to do a facility plan, and that would include this capacity plan.
Great. And, okay. And I was just going to say, Heather, next week we have some of the Garfield Township stuff coming to us as part of the agenda. So I think that's going to be an opportunity for us to talk a little about that. And then I know the contract we currently have has certain benchmarks that if townships hit it, we're supposed to be also working on it. Lauren, unfortunately, is at a conference tonight, so she can talk a little bit more to that. I know as we've improved the sensors and the kind of measurements, we're kind of having a better, our arms are better wrapped around how much the actual usage is, and I think that's going to be part of the discussion next week too.
Right,
So,
because we had some sensors that weren't working, Eagle wasn't paying attention.
Yep.
We definitely things got out of control.
yeah. So to be continued next week too.
Okay.
How am I doing on time? Okay.
Also, we're derailing you a little, so we'll be a little forgiving.
That's fine. All right. So just some key points here. Just the trends of the organic loading will be the ones that we're going to want to pay the most attention to, making sure that we're on top of that. It does suggest that what we've looked at, that BOD loading is most likely caused by the higher influent BOD concentrations versus driven by reduced I&I combined with potentially regional growth as well. So all things that would be part of a full capacity analysis. All right, here's the township and city-owned capacities per 2017 amended and restated master sewer agreement. So this slide, you just see that the own capacity rights for the city and townships, the city being 55%, townships 45%. That equates to 4.675 million gallons per day for the city, 3.825 for the townships. And then for organic loading or BOD, pounds per day is 11,112 for the city and 9,091 for the townships. Here, again, in this graph, the upper green line shows the city's own capacity limit, while the lower green line is the township's capacity. The blue columns indicate townships' maximum monthly flow, and the turquoise columns that represent the city's maximum monthly flows. Both these slides are in the fiscal year, July through June.
I have a question, Jen. Is this also those peaks back in 2019 through 2021? Is that also high water,
Yes.
rain stuff? So if the water comes up again, not if, when the water comes up
Right.
again, we will see that spike up.
Yes, how much, I don't know. Like I said, the city is doing a lot of linings, especially
Okay.
in those lower areas, so that should help significantly
Alright.
reduce that. The big takeaways here, both the township and city flows are well below their respective flow capacity allocations. There haven't been any exceedances to their capacities. Township flows remain stable without a sustained upward trend. And in contrast to rising BOD loading, flow trends indicate that capacity pressures are driven by the strength of the wastewater rather than the volume of it. And here we have the township and city monthly maximum loading, so organic loading capacity. The upper gray line is the city's own capacity limit, which is 11,110 pounds per day. The lower blue line is the township capacity, which is 9,091 pounds per day. The blue column represents the township's maximum monthly loading, and the turquoise column is the city's loading against their, again, these are in the fiscal year, July through June. Key takeaways here, there are no exceedances by either party. The townships did reach 84% of their allocation, most recently 24-25, and the city peaked in 2021 at about 79%. Again, the trends kind of align with what we're seeing on just the overall loadings to the plant. That's that gradual increase over the last 5-6 years. Key points of own capacity. The flows remain well below the own capacity for both. The BOD loadings consume a much larger share of the own capacity, with the township consistent closer to its BOD limit than the cities. Rising organic loading despite stable or declining flows indicate increasing wastewater strength or less dilution and or more growth, indicating organic loading is likely controlling capacity factor. And then just the main takeaways of this presentation is based on current operational data and planning standards, there's a significant or sufficient monthly flow capacity and organic loading capacity. However, this review is not a complete capacity evaluation and does not cover all unit processes or potential expansion scenarios at the treatment plant. While there are no ongoing flow-related capacity issues, again, that organic loading trend is something we want to keep an eye on. And like I spoke earlier, that our recommendation would be a comprehensive capacity study to guide long-term planning and development of a wastewater plant, and that would include stakeholder collaboration with the county and townships as well.
And that's in the CIP for next year.
It is.
Great.
Yes.
Go ahead, Mitch, and then Jackie.
Looking at growth projections, in the city of Traverse City, yes, we have a lot of capacity. We have a lot of use in both residential and commercial, but we don't have a lot of undeveloped land. We don't have, we have exactly 0 legacy septic systems in the areas that are fully covered by our sewer system. But if you go outside, you do end up with significant portions of the township. In some places, it's a patchwork of where is covered by municipal sewer and where is septic, and you can have new development opportunities that bridge that. Has there been a push by the townships to encourage the development to happen where the sewer connections already exist? And has there been a push to connect those legacy septic systems in areas that are now served by sewer?
I don't have an answer for that, but
Okay.
I don't know if Art can speak to that maybe.
Yeah,
Your choice.
We'll
probably
swap
should have just
up
had you guys up here, but sorry, especially because you have 2 presentations.
So the townships pretty much control their own rules and regulations of hooking up. I would think that if there are problem areas, maybe it's low-lying property near wetlands or something, they're concerned about leaching from septic fields into a lake or something, they may come up with a project to hook folks up and do some kind of cost share with them or something. But we really don't, I guess, work directly with them on how, recommending or looking at which areas should get hooked up. That's kind of their part in being their government, I guess.
Okay.
That's
So it will grow, but we don't have a clear picture of how or where that will necessarily happen.
But again, we have contracts, though, that have a limit on what they can take off
Right.
of us, too, though, so it's not a free-for-all.
and being involved with the BPW, the county, attending regular board meetings monthly, we'll be aware of situations where they want to add sewer, and we can discuss.
Jackie, go ahead.
It seemed from reading your documentation that dilution of wastewater is a real factor in future capacity limitations. And I am curious whether you can connect any dots between our efforts at lining and reducing I&I. Does that actually contribute to increased concentration of our wastewater? Is there a tipping point at which it becomes counterproductive?
I wouldn't say counterproductive, but, we're working to line, this year we did about 9,000 feet. There's plenty more to do, believe me. And we're spending about $1.2 million to do that this year. And so we're trying to get ahead of the next time, say, when the lake rises. We're doing as much as we can while the water's low. And by low, I'm talking almost 4 feet lower than it was in 2020, the bay and the river levels. So if you can think about the profile of a sanitary sewer is down maybe 8 to 12 feet below ground, and that groundwater in 2020 was above the pipe level, and now it's 4 feet lower roughly, because it pretty much, our groundwater in the city kind of follows what the bay and the river does. So a lot of the pipes that were underwater had imperfections, and there was letting a lot of infiltration in, which then the flow rises, and then the strength of the wastewater gets diluted. So now that we're at a lower level in the lake and the groundwater, we're not diluting it as much. Our flows have come down. You can see the trending. As the lake level dropped from 2020, we're just going down each year as our maximum. So they kind of roll with the lake level as kind of our little gauge or our measurement comparison to that. And unfortunately, we don't know until, like, the effectiveness of our lining, we won't know until it happens again, where everything's going to be high water, and we'll be able to compare back. Because you can line a pipe in one street and the water can't get in there, but it might back up and, and go down another and get into a different pipe that we didn't line. So, I'm an optimist, so I'm hoping the 1.2 million, and, you think about the streets we've replaced sewers in. Madison, Jefferson has all brand new PVC pipe, and that was in a groundwater area. So that used to be clay. That was letting in a lot of infiltration. Downtown along the river in the 100 block, just on the south side of the river, we did a 30-inch pipe there that's all brand new PVC, and it used to lay right along the river behind the wall, the 24-inch, and that was an old clay pipe, so that probably let in a lot of water. So all these projects we're doing, we're pecking away, if you will, at trying to keep that infiltration out. That's our goal.
Could I ask one follow-up question
Sure.
briefly? What do you use as an information source for forecasting lake levels? Do you feel like you've got a pretty good resource? Is there anything more predictive, more accurate that you wish you had access to?
I pretty much follow a document that comes out quarterly, and I can't think of the exact name of it, but it's Great Lakes something. Might be related to NOAA, N-O-A-A, the Weather Bureau or whatever they're called, but they don't forecast too far in advance, because it's really tough to tell and predict. So from what I recall, the lake levels used to range from like high to low, back to high over a 25 to 30 year period. I recall in 2013, we were pretty low, kind of like we are now. But then we went all the way to the high, and we're breaking records in 2020. So that's only like 7 years. So it's changing, but it's hard to predict what we're going to see in the future.
And a pitch to our, Heather's next, and a pitch to our federal officials out there, and anybody who wants to talk to them. Lots of funding has been cut to NOAA here in the Great Lakes area, so love to get those people back giving us more of that data. Heather, go ahead.
This is kind of a follow-up to Jackie's question. Were you basically talking about flow there? That sounded like it was more about flow, not loading, because that bullet point number 4, I mean, you're pointing out that you have to watch this, that it should be watched closely, and this is the loading, so this is more, these are the organic solids.
Right.
So as you're lining those sewers, we're getting a constipation problem, would you call it? And is there a mitigation? I mean, what are you going to do? Is there a mitigation for that?
I don't think we're going to turn the table so far where by lining, we're going to create a BOD loading problem.
Even though it says right there, these
We're-
trends should be.
We're going to be watching the BOD loading because that is one of the capacity parameters that we need to look at for the plant. So, like, the flow capacity and then the biological strength of the wastewater. I think it's, logically, if we're having less flow and the same amount of BOD that was coming in, say, from 2020 when there was a lot of flow, yeah, the BOD would be a stronger mix, if you will, now, because we have lower flows and the same or more BOD loading. So I don't think it's a bad thing to keep the I&I out, which is diluting. We're basically preserving our pipe capacity. We're gaining it back. So in 2020, we had multiple pipes in town that were flowing full almost the whole time, whether people were using their wastewater facilities or not. So
And it's not just the infiltration into the pipe, there's also exfiltration going on as well, isn't there?
most of the time, it's infiltration, because if that pipe is below the water table, there's pressure to try to come into the pipe. But if it was up above the water table and it had a
And it's
imperfection, then it could
Okay.
possibly come out. But most of the time, you're getting it coming in because it's under pressure. That makes sense.
Right, Ken?
Is there a specific portion of the wastewater treatment plant that you think, as far as the capacity is concerned, which one are we most concerned about? As the capacity increases over time, which element or part of it do you think we're going to need to see
Yeah,
more
I
of?
think I need Mark to help me on this one. So each process, I believe, has its capacity.
Right.
You know that more than I do.
Yeah, so when you're looking at organic loading, we'd be looking more at the aeration basins, the biological processes and the anaerobic digestion processes, as you're sending more of that organic waste to the anaerobic digestion. That's why looking at all those as one makes a lot of sense, because you don't want to do an upgrade to an aeration basin
Right.
and then not look at your anaerobic digestion, how it's going to affect that. So all that, tying that all together through a facility plan and looking at it all as a whole is the best way to do it.
I'm thinking about it because it's related to the next presentation you're going to give, and that's, the portion of the plant that we're going to need to see increases in related to the one that contributes to the most smell.
No. It'd be related to, I mean, it may,
The aeration
in
basins are
wastewater,
big-
aeration basin, to me smells like a musty earth. But people may find that offensive. So the odor study that Steve's going to talk about here in a little bit is, that would be one thing we'd look at, is all the different types of odors. Anaerobic digestion puts off typically like an ammonia or methane even smell. So we'll be looking at that too.
Thanks.
Are there questions right now, or ready for part two? Ken's done a great segue too.
Mark, John.
Yeah, good job. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, so as was alluded to, we've now got part two, which is an odor control study. So Art, I'll let you kick off with that.
Sure. Just real quick, we're going to look at a proposal of scope of work that Jacobs has put together, and we're going to talk about the odor control study that's being reviewed and looked at the wastewater treatment plant. So
Great.
I'm going to turn it over to Steve. Can you hear us, Steve?
Oh, wait a second,
on.
Steve, sorry.
That's my bad.
We can see you, Steve. We're just going to try and hear you now.
Try again.
Can you hear me now?
Perfect.
We got you. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. I'm going to try to go to presentation mode, and hopefully it translates okay to a full screen for you.
It got slightly larger for us, so I think that was the goal.
Okay. Yes, it was. Okay, great. Well, thanks everybody for the opportunity to talk about the odor study proposal that we had submitted. My name is Steve Graziano. I'm with Jacobs Engineering, work with Mark. And so I just wanted to give you a brief outline here of the presentation. I want to give a little bit of input into the odors. How are they generated? Why are they a concern? And the concerns will be a little bit focused on hydrogen sulfide, but we'll get into that. There's actually a wide range of odors at the treatment plant. Our approach to measuring odors and evaluating their impacts, and then that will naturally lead into basically describing the framework for the odor study proposal. So briefly, how are odors generated in wastewater? Well, most wastewater odors are associated with sulfides. And sulfides actually start in the sewer as sulfate. And sulfate can be in the sewer from drinking water, primarily for people who are on well water. When they use that at their tap, it ends up going into the sewer. As was discussed earlier, if there's infiltration of groundwater that's high in sulfate, that can contribute. And then, of course, there are some industrial, commercial, and domestic sources that make their way into the sewer. And that sulfate in an anaerobic environment that typically often happens in the sewer, in that anaerobic environment, the sulfate is converted to sulfide, and then it's also converted to hydrogen sulfide gas. And although we're often concerned with hydrogen sulfide, it's important to note that when we look at a treatment plant, there's a lot of different chemical and biological changes happening. So what you actually see is kind of summarized in this table on the right side is that there's a number of different odorous compounds that are generated throughout the treatment plant at various processes, various parts of the plant. So what we refer to these different compounds as having a different character, a different persistency, and a different intensity. And that's kind of what makes odor control an interesting topic. So why is odor a concern? Well, kind of looking at it from at least here from perspective of hydrogen sulfide, it's a nuisance. In the collection system, it's a nuisance because the collection system extends out to where people live, work, and play. So if there's any venting in the sewer, those odors can escape and impact people. When we look specifically at the wastewater treatment plant, we find that if the treatment plant is not in a populous area, it may not actually be an issue. It might lead to some discomfort with plant staff, but you don't have to worry about getting complaints from neighbors who are right next to the plant. But they can travel a long distance. So some perspective from H2S, it's a nuisance in the parts per billion concentration for the human nose. We can detect it at very low concentrations. But oftentimes some of the concentrations that we see at a treatment plant or in the sewers is in the parts per million range, so 1,000 times more concentrated. Another concern is worker and public safety. I mentioned at low concentrations, it can just be more of a nuisance. H2S is one of those compounds that has that distinctive rotten egg smell. And at low concentrations, it may not be have a significant impact from a health perspective, but at higher concentrations, it can lead to some serious injuries and even death. And there have been reported cases of that for example, when an operator enters a tank that is high in H2S. And then lastly, another concern is corrosion. And we spend a lot of money every year trying to address sort of this continual problem of corrosion. If we look at the sewers, as was discussed earlier, you see that hydrogen sulfide gas, it can actually also be converted to sulfuric acid. Strong acid, it reacts with the cement matrix that makes up concrete. And that's why you see it wear away and expose that rebar that's in reinforced concrete pipe. That rebar also corrodes. So If you look at the lower right photo, you'll see this used to be bright, shining copper piping, and with exposure to hydrogen sulfide, it turns black and is tarnished. So when we look at our approach to measuring odors and evaluating their impacts, we kind of follow this more or less standard. I mean, every application is different, but this provides a good workflow for how we look at these analyses. And the first one I'll talk about is how to identify odorous sources and estimate emissions. And we kind of rely on two main ways of doing that. And the first one is if we're measuring for H2S specifically, we'll often install something like an AcroLog or an ODALog. ODALog is pictured here in the lower right. And the nice thing about that is, although it only targets hydrogen sulfide, it does give a real-time measurement of the H2S concentration in the space in which it's installed. The other application is taking grab samples, but what we do is we've got a vacuum pump that's kind of shown with the yellow, sort of that yellow suitcase, or the gray one in the lower center photo. And there's a vacuum pump in there, and that vacuum pump is used to fill up a bag sample. So it's basically like taking a jar and wherever you are in the plant, capturing some gas that is just in the ambient air. And the nice thing about that type of analysis is that we can ship that bag sample to a lab, and we can analyze it in a couple different ways. One is you can put it through a mass spectrometer gas chromatograph, that machine in the lower left, and that can actually, there's different panels you can run. It doesn't tell you everything that's in that gas sample, but it allows you to measure individual components that are within that panel. But another way we do it is we take that gas sample and we send it to a lab, typically the same lab can do both tests, but you measure total odor. So it's characterizing the total odor impact of that total combined gas sample. And from that, we measure dilutions to threshold, which is sort of like a proxy for a concentration of all those odors together. And this is an interesting test because they actually hire people and they test them, they test their noses to make sure they have an average nose. So if it's somebody who's got a really sensitive nose, they excuse them from the panel. And if it's somebody who's can't smell anything, which I think we all know people who fall on both sides of that spectrum, they also don't want them on that panel. So they get a good average nose that sits on the panel, and they introduce increasing concentrations. They take that bulk gas sample and they dilute it down to very low levels, and they keep increasing that concentration until the person sitting there identifies that it's a detection threshold. They identify when they start to smell something. There is a recognition threshold tied to that too, which is when the human nose is able to identify it as something. So not just I smell something's there, it's I smell it and it smells like X, Y, or Z. So that result that we get, the D to T odor concentration, we use that and we calculate the odor emission rate. And that doesn't tell us exactly the offsite impact, but it does allow us to prioritize sources. So if you look at this graph here, this is an example from another project where you might look at the final clarifiers and say, yeah, we don't really have to look at those any further. Our main goal should be to look at some of those headworks processes like grit chambers or primary clarifier weirs or screenings channels. So once we know that, when we prioritize our sources, then we can look at the potential for offsite impacts. And to do that, we use programs called that are part of Air Dispersion Modeling Suite. And just to kind of illustrate the concept here, if you look in the lower right corner, you'll see that there's an exhaust stack. And this gets modeled. It could be an exhaust stack from a fan that's ventilating an odorous process. It could be the surface of a clarifier or the surface of an aeration basin. But the idea here is that there is some flux of odorous air, of mass, that leaves that surface, and it travels some distance. But eventually when it reaches ground level, let's say outside the plant fence line, it's been diluted. And we get a sense for the impact that of the dilution factor by factoring in all the meteorological data and also topography as well. So it factors in wind speed, it factors in potential temperature inversions that might happen due to the topography. If you have a tree line, or in the case that where you might have a large city and you've got skyscrapers, it can look at the impact of having those large buildings present. And the two programs that we typically use are AirMod, which is an EPA-issued program, and CalPUF, which is sort of a parallel that came out of California. The reason we, in this case, would use both of them is because AirMod is really good at capturing this information on a regional basis, but CalPUF has this added feature that allows you to better capture meteorological effects by being close to a large body of water. So the Great Lakes is a great example of that, or if you're on one of the coasts, CalPUF does a great job of that. And with air dispersion modeling, one of the benefits is that you can run what-if scenarios. So if you look at the lower left graph, this is one of the outputs. If we just looked at theoretical or hypothetical current condition, and what this is in a simple sense showing is that your impact without having any odor control actually covers a pretty wide area. If we go to the upper right, you'll see that maybe making a process change, like replacing a media that's part of an odor control treatment system, you can reduce that impact greatly. And that's pictures at the same scale, so you can see that it has shrunk. And then in the lower right, you'll see that if you put in a more substantial treatment system, like a biotrickling filter with carbon polishing, you can really reduce that offsite impact. And ideally, we can get this where that odor risk doesn't extend beyond the plant fence line, or if it does, that it happens at such a reduced frequency that you effectively don't have any risk of odor complaints or any real impact to neighbors. Now, we do know that community engagement is something that you've expressed some interest in, and community engagement is a really good thing. It's sort of a double-edged sword in some sense for the utility, because it does require fielding complaints from neighbors if they arise. But the great thing is that you don't know if there's an odor issue unless people tell you about it. So that is a great data collection source. And that can sometimes be facilitated by using something like this on the right, an odor wheel, where if somebody calls up and they say, hey, I'm smelling something that doesn't smell right, and you ask them, well, what does it smell like to you? They can give a characteristic, like it smells rancid or putrid, and you can associate that with a particular odorant. And some of those odorants are highly associated with different parts of the process, and it might indicate to the utility we may have an issue with the aeration basins or the digesters. So there's a lot of good information that comes out of that. The other part of it is that it shows, your residents, your ratepayers, that you care and that you are competent in following up and seeing these things through, and that leads to a lot of trust and transparency, and also some motivation to study these things and move them forward. So once we've done the air dispersion modeling, that helps inform us of what sort of treatment we may need. Sometimes it's treatment, and if you look at this next slide here, sometimes it's treatment, sometimes it's actually prevention through design, or it might be an operational change that actually makes a difference. Maybe addressing leaks or addressing building ventilation rates, that can lead to some improvement. But I won't go through all of these technologies, but it's just to give you an idea of some of the options that we can look at. And we're well versed in nearly all of these. The ones that are sort of maybe questionable at this point are brand new technologies that haven't seen a lot of applications yet. So there's often some little more hesitancy with choosing those ones or pursuing them. But the nice thing is that we bring a lot of experience from our other projects to identify which ones are feasible, which ones have high efficiency, which ones give operator flexibility and have lower O&M costs associated with them. So that would all be part of this study. So just wrapping up here with an overview of the proposal that we had submitted. Those 6 tasks that are laid out basically follow that same workflow that I had laid out. And I will mention that what we did submit was task 4, which included not just using the acrologs, only targeting H2S. It does include the bag samples, which is seen as a little bit more comprehensive approach. And we also included the air dispersion modeling using AirMod and CalPUF. And the idea behind that is, where the plant is located close to, very desirable places like the beach and to your downtown location, those graphics that come out of an AirMod or CalPUF model can be really useful in conveying the results of the study to your residents. Finally, we'd wrap this up in an alternatives analysis and a tech memo. So just from a high level here, we've laid out some of the main sources. I think in the version I had sent previously, I did not include the existing odor control inlet and exhaust, but that was part of it. And you just see there's a number of sources here that we'd be looking at to assess their impact off-site. So last slide here, just the main goals, just to reiterate them, would be to analyze the existing odor treatment system, identify odor sources and estimate those odor emission rates to allow us to prioritize them, evaluate the offsite impacts through the air dispersion modeling, and then use that to comprehensively review the improvements or technologies that you might consider looking at in the future for any capital improvement projects. And then just to tack on a couple that we know are kind of specific, are community engagement opportunities. So providing a framework for how you might pursue that in the future. And then also disconnecting, this one is specific, but you're currently sending some odorous air to the plenum that feeds the high-speed turbo blower. That is an approach, that is a technology in the list that can be used to treat odorous air. But unfortunately, that air that gets fed in there does have H2S in it, so it is corrosive. Mm-hmm. So to extend the life of that turbo blower, we'd like to disconnect that air feed to it. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Lance, go ahead.
Yeah, just do we have current H2S monitoring data at the plant? Like, is that happening currently? Just with that being both seeming like a quality of life and a safety issue.
Yeah, so as far as for the plant staff, some of the buildings have gas monitors within them, the more like the Headworks buildings where it's more prevalent to have gases come in. Operators also have individual units that gas monitors that they wear. And then as far as the odor control system itself, there is H2S monitoring on just the odor control system, but not throughout the different processes.
Okay, are we seeing that in the parts per million or the parts per billion that,
yeah,
the residents might be smelling like it?
Oh, I can tell you about that.
I mean, we all smelled something, that's for sure.
Yeah, right. Yes, I do. I'm trying to remember what the concentrations are. I want to say it was in the 0 to 50 maybe parts per million H2S on the, I think it was the outlet side of the odor system, but.
Okay, just something I think that we
it
don't
does
like to
vary through the seasons with the temperature as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess I had one more question. I was just thinking, you mentioned sulfate kind of having a smell, and I know our county's septage treatment facility, that septage gets pumped down into our facility, correct? eventually. Could that have a contributing factor, being that a lot of that water from out in the, where people have septic systems and wells has high concentrations of sulfate and has that smell? Are they doing any treatment before they pump that to our facility?
Yeah, that does go through a treatment system. It's similar as far as an activated sludge treatment process, but as far as concentration of sulfides and stuff, I don't know what those are.
Okay.
So that would be something that we would probably want to look at.
Mitch and then Jackie.
Yes. In addition to neighborhood concerns about our specific sewage treatment plant, there have also been concerns about, for example, the Sara Lee plant on Boardman Lake that is our largest customer at the sewage treatment plant and does some pre-treating on site. Do you feel that their system has been sufficiently resolved so that their pre-treatment is running smoothly and we're not having a secondary point source of sewage smells?
Yeah, there definitely was that issue last summer. That was pretty rough for a while, but that has been resolved since then.
And a follow-up question, is this monitoring good enough that it can filter out other sources of, for lack of a better term, smell noise? Like in Boardman Lake itself, there's plenty of ducks and geese that can produce various odors. There's algae in the lake, in the river, in the beach that can break down and create smells. And people can report, hey, I've smelled something stinky, and they blame it on the sewage treatment plant, but it might have another source altogether.
It might be better for Steve.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. That is always a possibility, that you do have some background odors. The tests that we would do, the sample collection, they tend to be pretty targeted. So, for example, I mentioned the sample pump. So we would, if you can imagine, if you've got an exhaust stack that is a concentrated source where you're ventilating, you can use a sample pump and you're pulling directly from that source. If you look at, for example, the aeration basins or the membrane tanks, one thing I didn't show in one of those photos is that there's also what they call a flux hood, and that flux hood is placed on, if you had solids that were stored and piled up, you'd put that flux chamber on there, and it's only collecting a sample of what's coming directly off of that. The same flux chamber comes with an inner tube around it, so you actually float it on top of those basins, the open tanks, and that prevents you from getting the background odor noise that you mentioned. So unfortunately, it's a little bit more difficult to capture the odor specifically from the geese, but I'm with you that that is often cited as a concern from people who encounter geese pretty much anywhere. But that's a great question.
Jackie?
As far as our samples, yeah, we'd be able to ensure that they are separate. They aren't factoring any of those background noises, background odors.
That's great. Jackie, go ahead.
Yes. Can you give us some examples of communities that have undertaken an odor study like this, what actions they took as a result of the findings, and what the end results were?
Yeah, sure. So we've done some work down in the Detroit area for Oakland and Macomb counties, and that's an example where they have a large interceptor system, and in that particular one, they were looking at using the air mod modeling more as a sensitivity analysis. What they have is a number of manholes along this large diameter interceptor, and we measured sewer pressures so you could look at what would be typically vented from the sewer through even just a 1-inch pick hole on a manhole cover. And we were able to do air mod modeling that looked at the severity under various pressures and various H2S concentrations for a receptor, which is a technical term for somebody who can smell something, within 50 feet of that interceptor. And we were able to look at that along the entire alignment of their interceptor. And we were able to identify which ones are hotspots, which ones are going to be at higher sensitivity, and also which ones correlate to known odor complainants. So that's another benefit of looking at an AirMod model, is when you get that site map and you have sort of a prevalence of odor off-site in one area, you may be able to correlate it, excuse me, with some historical complaints you may have received. And that alignment is just helpful. It's informative to the analysis. We also did a similar one for the Stickney water treatment plant in Chicago. And that was very similar to kind of the approach here, where we're looking at the treatment plant within the fence line. And it's a very large plant. And in that case, it helped us inform us of what sort of technologies we could implement. There was one that we had a carbon system. There was a biofilter improvement, not even a replacement, but improvement was suggested. And so in that sense, it's a really good decision-making tool as well.
Great, thank you.
Heather, go ahead.
I really appreciate your focus on identifying the sources rather than us just throwing a bunch of money at something. You did ask the question, why is odor a concern? And I didn't hear this in your presentation, but as we look towards future housing and recreation in that area and the area around the water treatment plant, which is a lot of our city, it's really more than an operational concern, and I'm happy you're recognizing that it's also part of our land use strategy and quality of life for everyone who lives here in Traverse City, as well as for staff. I mean, I understand that's a danger. And if our city really wants to concentrate some density along that 8th Street corridor, odor mitigation is very much what could be called economic infrastructure. And so I hope we can be, serious about reaching the point where that odor, it does not penetrate the fence line. That would be amazing.
Well, thank you, Heather, because actually that's a great segue. I was going to ask, and you've spoken to it a little bit, as someone who lives a half a block away, and definitely and has a sensitive nose, and would not pass the test for being one of the testers. That was kind of my question, and I guess maybe it's for Mark or for Art, but ultimately, I know we're going to do some public feedback and things on this. Is the goal essentially 0 cent? Is that possible, or is it more realistic? I know when I first moved into the area, which was 2012, I talked to somebody at the treatment plant and subsequently had tours. And I know at the back then it was like, oh, we try to only do these things that might smell once or twice a year. And then it kind of was like, well, but now we have to do some more operations, or some things smell in ways that we didn't anticipate. So is that kind of what people should be, as we hear us moving forward, anticipating is it'll be rare occurrences, or is there a possibility through the study, if we commit it as a budget item, or is it a possibility that essentially those would be so rare that we wouldn't even count on them once a year? It'd be a oopsie, kind of like we vented this too quickly or something.
Yeah, Steve, I mean, my goal, hope is that we eliminate it, but
Great.
Steve, maybe you speak to that better than I can.
Yeah, I'd say it's unlikely that you would have zero odors. Typically what'll happen is that we can provide a treatment system, we can select a treatment technology that will provide a high level of treatment. We will often not commit anywhere in the industry to 0 odors, because that's difficult, and it's difficult to parse it out from other odors. If we can capture and treat all the odors on a treatment plant, it is possible, I guess, in that case. But as long as they're going to have like open aeration basins. There will be some odor, but it's not, as Mark said, like an aeration basin is more of a musty smell. It's not highly offensive, but what we often find is an aeration basin tends to be one that disperses pretty easily. But a lot of this comes down to proper technology selection and making some other improvements at the plant, like having your primary clarifiers covered is a huge step. That's often a very significant odor, and or covering a lot of the influent headworks or controlling your digester gas venting. If that stuff all goes unchecked, your likelihood of having odors goes up quite a bit.
Okay, great, thank you. Go ahead, Ken.
I really appreciate the mayor and the city manager bringing this onto the agenda, because this is something that a lot of people in the community have talked about for a long time. Like, why don't we do something about this? It smells. It doesn't just affect people's, daily life, but quality of life, and we think about things like that. So I appreciate that, and it makes perfect sense that we would actually need to study this, because it's not just make the smell go away. It's, well, what are you smelling? Because we can tell where it's coming from, then, and we can, make adjustments to those appropriate places. So I really appreciate this, but I'm a little concerned of, like, how much is the cost? How long is it going to take to do the study and the analysis? When would we get a report? I'm just curious about the timetable involved in all that stuff, and the cost is one of those things, because when we talk about this as something that we're going to do, and if we're going to study it, we're probably going to take action on it. And so we're giving it life tonight when we, kind of decide that we're going to go forward with this and then vote on spending money towards doing the study. So we'll eventually take action then. So just curious.
So yeah, timeline and if cost, or
Cost.
when we might have the cost brought to us if we don't have that available.
Sure. Steve, I can speak to the cost. We estimated around 80,000 for this version with the air modeling and everything. What was the time frame, Steve?
You know what? I don't remember the exact time offhand, but typically, like the odor collection, for example, that we'll usually start with just reviewing any past data that you have, and that can typically happen within a couple weeks. And then we write a sample plan just so everybody's on board with where we're pulling samples, what analyses are going to be done, and any roles and responsibilities to do that. And then collecting the samples these are grab samples. So over the course of typically about 2 days, we can collect those samples, send them to the lab, and after a couple weeks, we'll have results back. Then I would say at that point, the biggest sort of split between air dispersion modeling, because we have specific modelers in-house that do that, they may need roughly a month to do that, and then we would write the report based on that. And that typically happens within another month. It'll go back to you for review. We'll get your review comments and then address those in the final report. So it's not like it's a year-long study. Once we get the notice to proceed, that can usually happen within about 6 months. I would say that the only thing that may factor into this, and it's maybe more so for the sampling we do when we do the collection systems side study, is that measuring in the heat of in the middle of the winter can sometimes be a challenge, but that's typically a sulfide-based focused analysis. In this case, the treatment plant tends to have pretty consistent wastewater temperatures, and we're pulling from pretty consistent processes, so that's less of a concern.
Okay.
I just
Really quick, can I?
In what he had mentioned as far as like that timeline of the things that they would do, one of the things that was community engagement, and I was just curious if
Well, I think before we get in the weeds on that, though, I think we'd have to decide, is this coming to us in the budget, or is this coming to us as a budget amendment? Art, do you know where that is in our process? Not that I don't want
No,
to
that's
know that
great.
and lay that out, but if we, if we're not going to do this until after we pass the budget in July, we're already not going to start for a couple more months and
Yeah.
have a timeline presented to us. So I just was
I gotcha,
curious.
that's fair.
So we did have this in the CIP for like current fiscal year.
Okay,
I'd have to verify we had it funded in the actual budget.
okay.
But we did put in, the next step would be like putting in an odor control system if the study comes up with a recommendation, which I think it would. We put that in the CIP for out a year or two.
Okay, so with that, then, would you be, and with the data collection, sorry, I'm a little piggybacking to clarify, and the ideal times to collect that, is that something you'd be thinking you'd be bringing back to us then in the next, like, month or two, or would you prefer it to, are you thinking it'd be closer to the summer, so you get the temps or something, and we'd be getting a timeline and a revisit in the next few weeks of just what that would look like, or what's your kind of pacing
As
schedule
far
look
as
like?
like the timing of bringing a proposal,
Yeah,
Benjamin and Mark and I have discussed, we wanted to introduce it at study session like tonight. And then if it's, if this goes well, or you're interested in moving forward, we could introduce it relatively quickly, probably in April, as a motion to go forward with a study based on a proposal.
great. Sorry, go ahead, Heather.
Yeah, I'm very much support moving forward with this, but I don't want to get hung up in winter. Informal poll, who smells the water treatment plant in the middle of the winter?
Right.
Yeah.
Although to be fair, looking at today, we're not really in the middle of winter anymore, so if we don't get it till
That's
April,
warm.
by the
Drove-
time we start,
Drove by it on a Sunday about a month ago and I could smell it. And it
You
was,
could smell it,
Yeah.
and that was winter.
and
Okay.
so I mean, but to kind of like, to be fair, this
Yeah.
it may be funded for this year, but even if it's funded for next year potentially,
yeah,
you know, this process could be a couple months.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't see it going longer than 5 months. But
Mm-hmm.
I was just, my focus was that a community engagement element might cost a little bit more because it takes more time and
Mm-hmm.
more boots on the ground, but like, the data and the analyzing of all this information is one thing, but asking the people that really smell it and that are affected by
Mm-hmm.
it, I think is a pretty key component. And when do they smell it? What do you smell? That seems to be very pertinent to this.
great. I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
So I think, Art, what I would say, just because I know that we have Sarah doing double duty here as clerk and as manager, and Art working on the presentation for when it comes back in April, making a note of that, maybe of the timeline, including and the pricing, including the timing and availability for public outreach and some of those elements, just making a note of that. So, great. Other questions or comments right now? All right, well, thanks, Art. You got a double whammy today, and thank you, Steve, for joining us virtually. I'm always so impressed, having come from 2020, where we are now with our tech. So,
Yep, thank you, everybody.
appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Could I add one more
Sure, absolutely, please.
piece of information? With the large project going on, we're really starting to get into getting stuff going. They were actually needing to disconnect the odor control system for a period of time. Is that a month?
Ooh.
So if you go out in the next week or so and you start smelling things, that is the reason why. We're working with Colleen to get that out there to the public. But we have to actually move the odor control infrastructure. So it has to be down for a period of time.
I will try not to curse you too much, Art, when I'm
Okay.
out in the next couple of days at my car.
I want to make that clear.
Thank
so
you for
don't-
announcing that for
We
everybody.
just talked about this and now it's terrible out there.
Yeah.
There's a reason, so
It's the march towards
apologize.
progress, so we appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yes, all right, because we just had a double whammy, I see you, Larry. Because we just had a double serving of wastewater treatment plant, if anybody wants to speak, any public comment based on that, usually for a study session, we wait till the end, but this has been very specific. So please approach the podium. We're going to have Sarah read the rules in her other hat.
We ask that you state your name, address, indicate if you're a city resident, non-city resident, and/or city business owner. We have a 3-minute time allotment per speaker. When your time has elapsed, when the time has elapsed, the timer will beep, and finally request that all language be respectful to all parties.
Perfect.
All right, very good. I'm Larry Gershbacher. I live at 925 Kelly Street here in Traverse City, city resident, of course. I'm retired. I spent 20 years with Shell Oil Company in northern Michigan with the play that occurred from I guess it started around 1968 and went through about 1995. Well, I was with Shell from 73 through 93. I had a lot of exposure to this hydrogen sulfide issue, and I can't believe that Steve didn't, he kind of passed over it as a second thought, I thought, because it is deadly. You don't want to mess around with hydrogen sulfide. 1 part per million is, if you went on the highway and put a chalk mark 1 inch long on the edge of a highway, you got to drive 15.7 miles down the highway and make another chalk mark. And that 1 inch that you mark back at 15.7 miles is 1 part per million. So it's pretty small, but it can be very, very deadly. They wouldn't allow any workers in the oil field to work without artificial respiration at 10 parts per million. You could smell it, but it was tolerable for an 8-hour work period that you didn't have to wear artificial respiration. 50 parts per million, you're down. 100 parts per million, you're dead. It paralyzes your lungs. And obviously, without lung power, you can't breathe, you're dead. So in this area, the Boardman area out here, there are probably people with respiratory problems, asthma, and those type of problems. And that odor that comes from the facility, from the treatment plant, would certainly have an effect on their breathing ability and their general health because of the hydrogen sulfide odor. And he said that as soon as it leaves the plant, it goes to the ground and it dissipates. No, it does not. It stays in the air, and depending upon the wind, which direction the wind is blowing, is going to be the effective area for that hydrogen sulfide. It's deadly. If there's some way that you could put into the budget to treat that so that it does not leave the plant, that would be fantastic for those people that have respiratory problems and the odor. And he's right. Hydrogen sulfide smells like rotten eggs. It's terrible. At Shell, we built a hydrogen sulfide processing facility in Manistee County on Fisk Road. And that area around Manistee County is a lot of hydrogen sulfide gas wells. So what they did is they piped all that hydrogen sulfide gas to this facility. They flared off or burned off the hydrogen and pelletized the sulfur, sold the sulfur back to Dow Chemical Company. And I was on that site when this process was going on.
Thank you.
Okay, I was going on, there's no smell on the site when I was there. It was clean, so.
Thank you.
Anyhow, take it seriously.
Thank you, Larry. Go ahead.
Hello, I'm Amy Flugheft. I'm a city resident. I live at 537 Webster Street, and I've been in this neighborhood for almost 30 years, and it is an issue, is indeed an issue for the residents that live here. I just want to state that it's not just a nuisance. I feel like that might be an understatement. It also affects the neighbors' residents' ability to use their property to its full capacity. And there's occasions where we can't open our doors, or we feel obligated to close our windows or not be outside. That's more than a nuisance, in my opinion. It also has the potential to affect the property values of people in this neighborhood, and I've heard people say, well, that was your fault for buying in the confines, proximity to the wastewater treatment plant. I don't think that's a good policy, and the city should have more regard for its residents that are living in town and participating and happy to be there. So I guess I just want to state a few things that over the years we've had the number for the odor control, but that has ebbed and flowed in terms of knowledge on the behalf of the residents. And I wouldn't necessarily take what you've heard of late, or maybe prior to this most recent kind of effort that the neighborhood heard about, because there's a lot of frustrated resignation in the issue. So I believe, this is a great opportunity. I encourage the city to go forward with a robust community engagement component, but I also, maybe in contrast to what I've seen over the last 30 years, I feel like it's been on the onus of the resident to tell you, or tell the the facility, and I have called on multiple occasions. Sometimes it's difficult to describe. And I feel like if I didn't have a nice, like, it smells like sulfur, it smells like, you know, cleaning chemicals or whatever, that I don't know, is that therefore my comment being dismissed? I don't know. I hope that's not the case. So again, the onus on the resident is something that I'm concerned about in terms of the past. And I think the other thing that I feel like is an issue is, you know, in that community outreach is giving people, I don't know if it's, you know, in addition to maybe an open house or coming to a neighborhood association or distributing magnets with a new phone number, some real effort to reach out to the neighbors so that they know that there could be, you know, there's a renewed effort that might have a difference. So again, I appreciate the attention to this, and I feel like this is a chance, not just for the encouraged and anticipated growth on 8th Street, but for the people who live there now, and that we'd like to see it change. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comment on this item? I just wanted to state that I think we're all in the consensus that we're not going to make this decision based on did we get enough calls to complain. We know that it's an issue, so I don't want anybody to feel like if their call hadn't been properly channeled that we're not hearing or understanding how that is a major issue over there. So I just wanted to underline that, and also to Larry's point, I know it was kind of on one of the earlier slides, but when Steve was presenting, he did kind of go over the parts per million and how that is, and I think that it was addressed to by Mark, that everybody wears personal devices on them and everything. So we do care about the safety of our workers and our neighbors, and so it will certainly be part of what will be studied if this does go forward, and I appreciate your experience and concern, Larry, but I just wanted to address that. That might have been skimmed over for the larger kind of purpose of the study, but that was addressed, that we do take care of our workers, so I didn't want that to be left out there. All right, well, thank you, everybody, for the comments on that. We're now going to move on to parking, everybody else's favorite topic. So there you go, Nicole, raising the roof, get everybody hyped.
Good evening. Nicole Van Es, Parking and Mobility Director. Thank you for the opportunity to come and speak with you in regards to parking. It's been a while since we've had an update. It'll be 2 years this May since the City Commission terminated the agreement with the DDA to take parking management back over. I do want to remind everybody that parking has still been a part of the city. We do manage parking assets and have. As part of our discussion tonight, we're going to be talking through a quick budget snapshot specific to pre-COVID, during COVID, and we've kind of reached this point in our budget of post-COVID, impacts that we know in the capital improvements and current plans that may have impacts on the budget, and as well as getting into our transportation demand management initiatives and the 3-year budget and proposed budget increases. So I feel like it's always important to remind anyone anytime that we have an opportunity, parking is an enterprise fund. So we do not receive tax dollars. All of our revenue is generated from on-street parking meters, from the hourly admissions that you pay when you come and park at the decks, your parking citations, and also your parking permits. So all of those revenues go into every device that we purchase, every lease that we have with a property owner, all of our equipment, our maintenance, and our salaries and wages. So for our budget snapshot, we've kind of reached the point now where we can start talking about post-COVID. Pre-COVID, we were doing pretty well as it related to revenues. We had started doing some transportation demand management initiatives, which really talked about how we shift demand. The focus was really on vehicles. We had overflowing lots. We had overflowing garages. It was hard to find a place downtown. When COVID occurred, there was this transition to work from home. So, a lot of the offices have less employees. And then also, we've all seen it with retail and restaurants, how it's changed that portion of the business. And so within that piece, our revenues, as we look at them, our meter revenue pretty much has remained consistent. And I'll show you a graph on the next slide. Our surface revenue did decrease because we sold Lot V, so that reduced our number of spaces, and we went into a grandfathered surface permit purchase situation. And then our fine revenue has increased slightly. Within the Hardy parking structure, we did have a slight rate increase. Part of that was due to a rate increase that we implemented back in 2021. And then our permits relatively remained the same until we had an increase in 2022 and 2025. The same with Old Town, our hourly proceeds decreased, and then they had a slight increase with our rate increase in 2021. And then our permits had a decrease, and then they are coming back up to be in line with what they were post-COVID. We also implemented with short-term rentals, you could not repurpose a permit. So every rental now has to buy a permit. They cannot buy a permit and then sell it as part of their rental. So that was an ordinance change we made back in 2022 when we also did the first rate increase. And so that's part of our revenue increase that you're seeing with the parking permits. If you look at this graph with our revenues, we have a combined, we often talk about revenues as parking general, which is on-street meters, surface permits, fines, and then also we break it down by Hardy and Old Town. We do that because we want to make sure that we can identify if the garages are self-sustaining, where they are with their maintenance costs. And then if we were to make adjustments, talking about those adjustments separately from just general revenue adjustments. And so if you look at the combined line, you can see that our revenue in 2018-19 finally hit in 23-24. So this is all positive for the budget at least, but it's been this long as it relates to pre-COVID, post-COVID to get to this point. And so we have put projects on on hold. We're always very conservative. We usually don't make adjustments or purchases until after the beginning of the year, because all of our revenue is really captured between May and October. And so we use those summer months to really kind of give us an idea of where we will land at the end of the fiscal year. Impacts on our budget. We have new expenses. We are going to see increases in our IT expenses. We always have software expenses. A lot of what we do in parking has shifted from being mechanical to being very tech. And so there's recurring software fees, employee uniforms. Our increasing expenses, credit card fees are super expensive when it comes to a credit card fee on a $1.50 transaction. Retail, they're able to do a credit card fee on a $100 transaction, but our credit card fees are pretty expensive. And that's why that 5-year agreement that you guys approved a few months ago with Park Mobile was really important to us, because with that model, Park Mobile is acting as the merchant of record, and we're retaining 100% of the revenue. So they're absorbing those fees as part of their convenience fee. So we look towards other opportunities with vendors to leverage that piece in order to save those credit card fees. We are also at the point where we are reaching end-of-life devices. We implemented smart meters. It was the convenience of adding credit cards as more people were not carrying change or had bills. But those devices, too, are also reaching their end of life. And so there's just a lot of mechanical replacement and device replacement that comes in. We've seen an increase in our utilities because we offer free power for EV. So that's one of the things we'll be looking at changing. And then also with our lease on the Hardy retail space, now we have additional cleaning contract fees and other fees that associate with that contract. So that's our current impacts. Over the past 15 years, we've looked at implementing ways to slowly maintain the facilities. So this is just a quick list. I'm not going to go over them. You can see Lot O and Lot B have had deferred repairs. Lot O is the homestretch property. So we had that plan for repairs, homestretch had an agreement, so we tabled it. Lot B has been shifting back and forth for many years. But within this list, these are not all the lots that we manage. So there is a plan that we've got to get those lots back in. When COVID occurred, we had to postpone all of those maintenance. None of the lots were in such disrepair that we couldn't get by. We do have some holes that we patch, but we do need to focus on some of the maintenance in those facilities. As far as the current plans with the CIP, we do have a project that we're working on with the DDA. We're going to do the parking lot. They're going to build a farmer's market pavilion. That current lot has an average of $1,030 per space in revenue a year. So we're estimating a loss of $37,000 a year. We do foresee that the lot rental fees, with being able to charge $350 per space when that pavilion is rented, would be $350 a day just for the lot. We have to talk through what the additional fee would be for the pavilion itself. With the Fish Pass project, that connection from Fish Pass to Rotary Square, we're going to lose 14 spaces, and that's estimated at $21,000 a year. We also have a
Nicole?
grandfathered.
Can I jump in real quick and
Sure.
ask a question? So with the Farmers Market Pavilion going into Lot B and the Cherry Fests, their space, or the midway that they used to put there, they reimbursed the Parking Enterprise Fund for that lot for that period of time, didn't they?
So
Was it-
actually, this is the first year they're going to pay parking,
Okay.
right?
I thought they had in the past.
No, they
Yeah, the last
were,
couple
in
years.
previous agreements, they did not have to pay any parking fees. So all of the lots, the marina, Lot T, Lot B, RB, was all included in the agreement. So this is the first year that they're going to actually start paying some portion of their parking fees, and it's going to be incremented in, so it won't be 100%. I think it's 25, 50, 75, and 100 is how I think it's over 4 years.
I was just curious, like, how much revenue we'll lose by not being able, well, that Parking Enterprise Fund will lose by not being able to rent that out to the Cherry Fest. Just curious.
Yeah, so at this point, with them not paying any fees, we won't lose anything, but going forward, they would still pay for for the lot use. And then anyone else who was renting the pavilion would also pay a lot fee.
So just to back up, though, I think what Ken's asking too, though, is when the pavilion goes in, Cherry Festival won't stop using that lot, though, correct? Or will they?
We haven't heard any plans for them to use, not to use the pavilion. I
Okay.
think they're going to figure out
Yeah,
how it
that's fair.
works. I think
Yeah.
they're going to figure out how it works within their operation.
So we might still make some money with this new plan, ramping them up, if they decide to do some kind of modified plan there.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Heather,
I have
go
a
ahead.
question too. You mentioned losing 14 spaces for Fish Pass. Where are those? They're not the alley ones,
Yeah.
right?
They're the alley
But the-
spaces.
Yeah.
But our presentation from DDA says you're only taking those away during special events.
That'll be on us to decide. We can give it away for access, to
So
make it
that's-
larger,
it's
or
not
it
a
will be
done deal
confined
then.
to, no.
You're saying it's a done deal, but
Well,
it's
this
not
is in the
actually a done
I
deal.
said this is in the capital improvement plan.
Yeah.
So within the capital improvement plan, there is this project with and I believe Harry's speaking to that next, but those spaces would be redone to tie in the lot to Fish Pass.
Well, the presentation says only during special events.
How does the loss of the right-of-way due to the MDOT with the Grand View Parkway, if we reconstruct Lot B, then we have to reconstruct it respecting the easement, correct?
Correct.
But if we don't redo the parking lot, then we can keep those spots along there that are in the easement as they've historically existed?
Correct.
Okay, and we're going to lose how many because of that easement?
Roughly 34.
It's like 34 along that edge there?
Yep.
Just a question, thank you.
Yes. So
Well,
then,
Jackie, go ahead, sorry.
Yep.
You had mentioned a total loss of 188 parking spots, and that includes the MDOT right-of-way as well as the 13 or 14 along the Fish Pass River Overlook, correct?
so the 188, I'm not quite there yet
Oh,
on the
I'm
map.
sorry.
But
I'm leaping ahead.
But the 188, again, this is a projection based on what's in the CIP and plans. So that 188 includes the spaces lost in Lot B with the Farmers Market Pavilion and Lot B reconstruction, the Rotary Square Fish Pass connection in Lot K, the loss of spaces in Lot P for the West State Street reconstruction or development, whatever that is going to be. And then also there is a State Street has been identified to lose a row of parking from Boardman to Pine for mobility initiatives. And so that's also factored into this 188.
All inclusive.
Yes.
And
Thank you.
just to clarify, because we were going in and doing the pipes and everything under the farmer's market, we were going to be modifying it enough anyways, correct? This isn't just we decided to put a pavilion in and now we're losing spots because of MDOT right-of-way.
So we could just patch the lot and lower the improvements, but the plan was to get the lot set so there could be a pavilion at some point placed on the lot.
Okay, so that we could have patched it to do the whole piping, the whole pipe underneath?
If we patched it, we would not have to do the piping underneath.
Okay, but we need, yeah, go ahead, thanks.
And we don't know that we're losing any parking in Lot P because
Right.
anything could happen there. And we don't know that we're losing all that parking on State Street either because we don't know what's happening there. So there's a lot of.
Parking is a big
no
puzzle.
done deals
Puzzle's
here.
a bit, yeah, it's a big
Parking
puzzle for
is a
you.
puzzle,
And
so-
frankly, I will save Nicole a little on this, and I think that's what Heather's going for, is ultimately it's our decision at the end of the day, what we approve and don't approve. So
Right, but you-
if we do everything that's out there,
potential.
we'll lose all of these spots.
Keyword
Yes.
potential.
Yes.
Potential.
So, and I think it's just because a lot of times projects come forward and parking is kind of the last piece to be included or discussed, and it also affects the revenue and the budget. And so whenever we're keyed in on these CIP projects, we always are anticipating them when we propose our budget. So some people are like, why are you proposing less meter revenue? But we factor those in, assuming that something's going to happen, and we may take a hit to the budget.
Thank you, Nicole.
Again, we're pretty fiscally conservative when it comes to what we put out, just because we have to be with operating within the enterprise fund. So within the surface permits, getting back to the slide, we currently have a total of 198 spaces. We do only allow for surface permits to be renewed if you renew the permit prior to expiration. The reason for that is we currently have 357 active permits, which is an 80% oversell. So we've tried to get that number down. Industry average is 30%.
Wow.
Even at 80%, we still have vacant spaces in Lot T, which just blows our mind. Because with 80% oversell, we should have people calling saying that they've been circling the lot. So that goes back to pricing management that we've talked about in the past, and about how the pricing is too low, that people are, it's just like a gym membership. They're purchasing it, they're going to hold on to it. They may or may not go to the gym, but it's reasonable enough that they're not willing to cancel. So we're going to look at some pricing as it relates to surface permits. And then again, the projected, if we were to have development on the west end with Lot P, we would lose 57 spaces, which would result in a 153% oversell at our current sell rate. And then the mobility initiatives, again, if we were to do an east-west connector, that would eliminate 81 spaces and roughly 115,000 per year.
When it comes to the permits, could we look at something more than just pricing, just raising the price? I understand that can help, but I think that there's also factors that go into place. People working downtown making, 18, 20 bucks an hour. If we're just pricing them out of being able to park near their employer, I think we're doing a disservice. So maybe there's more of a rubric you could come up with that also increases pricing, but also says, you get extra points because you work downtown. In such a way that we're not essentially hurting our employees. Because I wonder if that, I don't know if we've studied it, but I wonder if the 80% oversell, because it is just an easy, inexpensive price, you got on the wait list, you got in there, and then you're just like, well, I don't actually work downtown, but I go downtown. And so now I'm just using my permit to go downtown instead of go to work. Just a thought, if you had any.
So when it
thoughts
comes to
around
us, you're looking for a little more data on who has them currently and who doesn't, and
Yeah,
maybe some kind of pricing plans or something.
Yeah.
So just noting for future when
Yep, yep.
when that price increase comes to us.
On Lance's note, like when I think about, like when I'm gonna go downtown and buy something, I'm probably not gonna be parked for more than an hour. But as far, and I might park in a parking lot, but if we could come up with a mechanism to incentivize parking deck utilization for downtown employees, like I think that would be probably use the parking decks more so we can increase the usage of those for people who are, if you're gonna work 8 hours or 10 hours downtown, you're gonna get to walk across a fish pass now, the bridge, if you park at the Old Town deck. So it's just an option. I think it might be worth exploring. I don't know.
Yeah, I will just reference, we have done 2 employee studies in the past, and you'll hear me say this, I haven't had an opportunity to say it recently, but we really don't have a parking problem, we have a walking problem.
But
So if you look
incentivization.
at the employee survey results, employees are saying that it's way too expensive to come downtown to work, but they're not taking advantage of the permit and walking, they're paying at the meters because it's a convenience and a locale issue. And so instead of it hindering their wallet, they like the convenience factor. And so, and that is, it is in our employee survey results. So we have done 2 of them, and so I hear what you're saying. I can, revisit that, but again, it's not a parking problem, it's a walking problem. Yes.
And to that point, yes, we can set pricing accordingly, but I would be interested in, I know we've tried various things in the past, but encouraging those people, whether they are working downtown, shopping, or even living downtown, that are able to, say, walk, bike, or take the bus, as opposed to driving and then having to park.
I think this is a bigger, and to be fair to Nicole, this is a bigger mobility conversation we'll definitely have in the future. Also, as somebody who worked downtown for many years in retail and almost got booted like 6 times for having parking tickets, I also understand what she's saying about the convenience factor, so. So anyways, continue, Nicole, thank you.
But wait a
Oh, sorry,
second.
go ahead.
But if we have a walking problem, those are the people who are just coming downtown to shop.
No.
So the parking decks are, you price the parking decks a little bit cheaper, and that's where the employees can.
No, the walking problem is with the employees, is
It's
what
with-
she's
well,
saying
it's
in the
with
study.
everybody,
Yeah.
but an employee with a little bit of incentive of discount.
We
So
actually,
it is that
we
incentive.
actually
hold on.
lowered our permit rates from $50 to $35 a month, so
And you're still not
$15.
getting them?
And we did not,
No.
we tracked our sales, we had 6 people.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh
And
my
we've
gosh.
operated at that $35 rate
And yet
for
people will
4
park in
years
the Myers parking lot and walk 2 blocks.
to get their milk, yes.
yeah.
The Haggerty return to office policy that goes into effect in April, are you anticipating anything positive from that for Old Town?
We are monitoring that. The thing is, again, parking is a puzzle, and it also is not something, everybody wants to say, we have to have X amount of spaces, we've got X amount of employees. They have been rolling in their different departments coming back. So every number they give us is not the number that we're seeing. So we're monitoring that. I think, again, it comes down to what we've seen in past employee survey results. And at one point, when Haggerty was in full force in 2019, we were asked to provide a shuttle that went from level 4, 3, 2, 1, and drove them across the street to Haggerty.
Yeah. So,
So, I'm sure that it'll be a little bit before those employees end up in the deck. It'll probably be an enforcement soft bridge to get there, but we're just not seeing those numbers right now.
Thank you.
yes, and you've got 2 more slides, so I'll let you go through
Yes.
those too, so we don't get you too derailed here, but.
So back again, prior to COVID, we had started TDM management strategies. We had a consultant that came out and did the initial study. During COVID, we made quite a few changes because downtown, the whole dynamic had shifted. We weren't dealing with changes that we would have to affect people the next day. A lot of people were working from home, so we took it as a way to take swift action, get rid of a lot of archaic practices that we had had. And when they came back, this was kind of the new operating order. So with that, we did have City Commission adopt a rate ceiling schedule back in October of 2020. At the time that the ceiling was adopted, we did say that we were going to wait until we got to a point where we saw revenues return to what they are, which is where we're at now. And so we have not really made any rate increases, just waiting for that utilization to come back. So we will be publishing a 3-year rate schedule with our budget. We are looking at implementing electric fees for EV. So currently, again, we do not charge EV or electric for EV. So we will be looking at implementing those fees. We are also going to look at doing a meter rate increases seasonally. And then backing off in the winter where the locals are here, and also extending hours into the evening during those seasonal peak times. And then once we get further into some of these other recommendations and seeing how the patterns fluctuate, we may be looking at revisiting residential permits and employee parking options in residential. And so we may be able to gain some space inventory in the areas that are not directly in front of residents' homes, but areas such as Wadsworth, Boardman Avenue, Wellington, areas that do not have resident access, but are off of the business and retail district. Within our 3-year budget, again, we mentioned the capital improvements, and so we've identified those losses. As we're looking at our rate increases, we, again, will be looking at publishing that 3-year rate increase, and then also asking for a surface permit ceiling increase, so if we do end up having to further adjust that oversell, we can utilize that. And then we're currently talking about a reserve fund for maintenance and repairs. So anything that we have extra always goes into our surplus, but specifically identifying a line item for those repairs and maintenance.
Fantastic. More questions? Go ahead, Jackie, then Mitch, then Lance.
Looks like you're dipping your toe into peak demand pricing.
Yes.
Strategy, and some industries have found mixed results with that and a lot of pushback. Are you expecting pushback, or how would we respond?
Yeah, so I think with parking, we expect pushback every day. It's just not something that we usually get high fives for. I think that what we're seeing, and I can tell that the staff would also echo, in the summer months, we get nothing but praise. And it's from people that are not from here. So they're like, it's so cheap, we love coming downtown, thank you for being here, thank you for helping us. And so we actually enjoy the summer months, even though they're very intense and very busy. But a lot of it's a lot of the residents are walking downtown or they're riding their bikes. And so we're not as concerned about them. We, again, get a lot of compliments in the summer. So our seasonal approach from Memorial Day to Labor Day, I don't think will impact or will get much negativity in the sense of what we've seen in the summer months.
Thank you.
Mitch, go ahead.
Yes, it's something outside of our control, but as the airport is going to be expanding, a significant share of their revenue projections from the expansion are from both short-term and long-term parking. So is there a continued eye on our rates, especially for long-term parking in the deck, to make sure that we don't have a situation where people are parking downtown and then taking the bus or getting a lift to the airport when they go on vacation?
Yeah, so I mean, we deal with that now. We have plenty of people that purchase a permit for a month. They go to Arizona. They're out. We store their vehicles. We actually tried to implement a fee for storage, and I see Christy's in the audience. She was a former commissioner at that time. At that point, again, our permits, we're only able to identify who people are based on who they're registered to, and it's really hard once you start diversifying permits to the point where you're looking at pay stubs or trying to identify certain employers and certain, and we've done a lot of data collection from other cities that have parking structures and have permit programs, and nobody is getting down to like granular permit offerings. A lot of the discounts that are offered are really meant for residents, not so much employees. And so, again, mobility and other transportation items are what factor into getting employees downtown. So at this point, we're just looking at the standard permits based on location, and then we'll see how that plays out and if we need to further adjust.
Thank you. Lance, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I noted that you have implement fees for EV charging, and I would just ask that as you look at what those fees are, you don't price EV chargers out of the market. What you'll find often is these EV chargers, for example, the ones at the library, are almost double the rate of a residential rate, and so it really makes charging an EV almost more expensive than filling a gas car. And as we're just trying to move towards a more sustainable, electrified city, I would just ask we look at that and we say, okay, we're going to make this just like you're charging at home, because we are charging you to also park here at the same time.
And so do you have contact, because I know all ours and our decks are run by TCL, or TCLP has part of that, correct?
No, TCLP is doing all the ones in the surface parking lots.
Yes, thank you, sorry.
On city property. Parking, that's why we don't charge, because it's been in the parking decks. And when Old Town was built, charge point charging stations were added. And at the time, EV was fairly new, if you can imagine, it was not that long ago. But that's why the decision was made to make power free, because they were still trying to gather adoption into EV. And so we then added residential units to Hardy because they were cheaper and we wouldn't have to get into a contract with a vendor, because those units are fairly expensive. And so we've just been adding residential units, providing the free power. And so right now we actually get people that come to the office who are saying this person's there, but they're fully charged and I want them gone and I want to charge. And so at this point they're being used.
Yeah, I'm all for, paying your fair share.
Yeah.
I would just, if we're going to encourage our residents to park and charge with their EVs, I wouldn't want them paying more than they're paying at home
Right.
to do the same.
Right. Go ahead, Heather.
It looks like your recommended strategies are really all about raising revenue. There's not much revenue coming in for either of those decks, so raising rates isn't going to help there. It seems like what we need to do is change behaviors, and Lance next to me muttered under his breath, this looks like a marketing problem. What about better wayfinding improvements downtown and a big garage-first guidance? If you're not from here and you're driving down Front Street, there's a lot going on, and you could drive right past that the Hardy Deck and not even see it. Old Town is out of the way. People don't even go over there. So why can't we have can we try a strategy of big wayfinding signs, big Ps this way?
Yeah,
notes being
we can
taken.
definitely look at adding utilization. I can say that we do get Google Analytics, and the amount of people that search public parking and then find us, they either look at Hardy or Old Town. Those numbers, you definitely see them go up significantly in the summer months and go down. So people are using directions to get to us. So it's not that they can't find us, or they're going through the maps, whether it's tied to their vehicle, their CarPlay, or just on their mobile phone. So we do have that information as well.
So this is more of a resident problem. They just don't want to park in decks. But you'd think that if tourists and visitors are using the decks in the summertime, you'd see better revenue coming out of those decks. It's just so low.
We do see, we track it month to month, and we do see an increase. Yeah.
Really low.
I didn't even realize it was so inexpensive. So I think we got to tell everybody.
Act now before it goes up.
And back to the issue, no one walks.
Yeah.
And the idea of a circulator bus as opposed to a straight-through Bayline type public transit service, I think I would be awfully pleased to see that come upon a DDA agenda sometime.
We did do some initial fact-finding as it relates to trolleys, because we were getting a lot of input, how a lot of people are implementing them and they're free. The cost of a circulator service is roughly $1 million. So, if we can find a funding source that can circulate, that is something that we work through. A lot of them are also actually funded by tourism bureaus. And not to funds or public funds. They're usually tied to some kind of cruise ship, or some kind of tourist attraction that then is circulating them around.
Yeah.
Branded, fully branded.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I used one in San Diego, and all the hotels paid for it to go between themselves and get dropped at convenient locations. So, yeah. So we can look at that for sure. I'm curious, too, though, once the back to work happens, if we see some differences in revenue, since we had people complaining about having to park on the top floor and get a ride downstairs. Hopefully it comes back to that. But Jackie, did you have another question?
Well, as long as we're talking funding, this may be impolite, but I don't know when parking services became an enterprise fund and self-supporting, but I am always fascinated by the communities in our state who are able to offer some version of free parking, whether it's Holland or Rochester Hills or Birmingham. And I just wondered if that model has been explored recently, if it has any merit. And I think of parking as a public good, which in my mind, public goods are publicly funded. So I'm oversimplifying, I know that, but I think as a longer-term strategy, perhaps beyond this 3-year budget cycle, it would be worth digging into.
Laura, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I have a quick question. A lot of the recommendations are budget-focused or revenue-focused. With this projected loss of 188 spaces, seems like we may also have a supply issue. And what are the future strategies looking forward around supply? What's the 188 is how much of the inventory? What's the total number of spaces that we have available?
So there are roughly 950-ish, give or take, on street, and the same in the lots. And so the thing is that The big piece when we talk about permit rates is that the on-street meters and the in-lot meters are really what subsidize keeping those permit rates low. So if we look at eliminating metered spaces, which is our revenue source, to keep those permits low, we have to look at where we're going to increase that revenue in order to still keep them reasonable. And with that, some of our non-leased meter lots may have to convert to permit parking. So again, if we take a lot that's actually helping subsidize those permit rates, and now we convert it from meter, where we make the most revenue, to being a subsidized permit rate, we have to factor that in. So there are some things that we're looking at strategically on the back end, but in order to make those changes, we have to be prepared for that revenue shift.
Okay, so it's about a 10%, it's about 10% of the spaces, but much more of the revenue, is what you're saying.
Because of it being on-street, which is not factored into lease payments. So there's other factors when we get into the lots that occur with the meters.
Okay, I think it's just something we'll have to keep our eye on, because the access to downtown is clearly drives economic vitality, and then keeping our eye on the parking and making sure that that supply doesn't inhibit that, I think, is really important.
Heather, you had your hand
Yeah,
up.
with all the capacity in those 2 decks, I would say we don't have so much of a capacity problem, we have a distribution problem. So, and then we're back to the, is this a marketing problem? How do we get people to use what we already have? That, we don't want to build anything more, and we are going to lose some of those lots. So how can we utilize the infrastructure we already have?
I would agree with Heather, and I would also say, going into that, though, the ideas of how expensive our decks are to a point too. It's a chicken or the egg scenario, because we do have people buying permits and then housing their car there. I know that we can also talk about neighboring communities that used to have free parking or very inexpensive parking. Petoskey used to have that, and they had people who would just park their car downtown all day and go out on their boat. And so we have to kind of watch at that, make sure there's that turnover that I know that you analyze, Nicole, when you're doing your numbers, and the EV charging and everything else too. So I appreciate where the conversations are going. Some of this is going to fall on us too, as we decide on some of these projects of, for Rotary Square, the property itself is the DDA's, but we have the alley. We could say no to that part, but that's part of the decision process we have, as well as other projects, as Nicole has highlighted as well. So do we have other questions right now? Or I know this won't be the last we'll see of Nicole. So go ahead, Jackie.
Final, and simply a caution. I appreciate your idea for shifting employee parking into the neighborhoods. Makes me really uncomfortable.
It's our last resort.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Nicole. Since this is another popular topic, does anybody want to speak just on parking presentation alone? No takers. All right, we'll keep it moving then and have Harry join us for a discussion on Rotary Square. Already been discussed to a point, so welcome up.
Good evening, Commissioners. Harry Burkholder with the DDA, and our presentation will touch a little bit on what Nicole talked about with the parking near the Fish Pass, but we wanted to come here tonight to talk about Rotary Square, where we are with the planning process and the development process, and Commissioner Anderson and Treadwell already heard this presentation last week, but I appreciate the opportunity to give this to everybody. This is really a project almost 29 years in the making. A civic square downtown, a central meeting space, was in the original TIF 97 plan, and we've been kind of eyeing the location for quite some time, and then was spurred to move forward with a $2 million grant from the state of Michigan in 2018, and then another $1 million grant from Rotary Charities. I'm sure you're familiar with the site location right now on the corner of State and Union, right across from the post office. I think an ideal location for many reasons. One is it has the potential to connect with the Fish Pass project, but also is a bridge really between downtown and Old Town, and then also the neighborhoods that surround that area. So we spent the last 14 months or so developing this vision. Some of you might have participated in some of those events, the Imagine Rotary Square events. And so really excited to talk about this project. I'm going to invite Jason Ball up here. Here's our lead consultant from Progressive Companies to help us develop this site and work with the civic engagement. So I'm going to let him talk about the project, and then we can answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Harry. Good evening, Commissioners. Again, my name is Jason Ball from Progressive Companies. I'm just going to very quickly go through some background on how we got to today in terms of our engagement process. We'll quickly just sort of pop through the conceptual designs, and then happy to answer any questions you may have about the relationship between Rotary Square, the alley, and the existing parking spaces. As Harry mentioned, it's been about 14 months since we got started. The project officially kicked off kind of publicly last January. We did a lot of work sort of in the spring of last year with a community survey, engaging stakeholders, that all sort of rolled into getting really lucky on some weather in our open house in May, which is pictured here. So total, we had over 1,000 points of feedback that drove our conceptual design for Rotary Square. You can see those numbers here. We had 480 responses to our community design survey. We held about 8 stakeholder meetings in the Opera House back in February. We did 5 pop-up locations all over the city in March of last year. Then our first open house in May, which is pictured here, we had about 66 people and 227 online responses. Our second open house, fewer people in person, about the same number of online responses, 30 people in person, 217 online. Through all that feedback, we heard a few things over and over and over again, and these 4 things are those things we heard. When we started out with our advisory committee, we had a conversation about whether the Rotary Square space should be more park or should be more urban plaza. In other words, should it be more grass and natural features and sort of natural ground cover, or should it be paved? And it was really clear, it wasn't even close. We leaned natural cover versus paved throughout, and so the design reflects that. We also heard really clearly that Rotary Square shouldn't be a space that's cut off for special events or is geared towards tourists. It should be a space for everyday park use, for residents, people that work downtown. Yes, it should be able to host events and do small concerts and things, but really it needed to be a space that functioned as an everyday park, a place for people to meet and spend time, the vast majority of the year, 300 days of the year. It shouldn't be dedicated towards special events. Also, it needed to work all 4 seasons. We talked a lot about shoulder season with our steering committee, thinking about how it was a space that functioned all year round, not just when it was nice outside. And then last on this list, but not last in terms of what we heard from folks, was the connection to Fish Pass and the river. So at our first open house, we had a whole list of priorities that folks could select from. Connecting Rotary Square to Fish Pass and the river was priority number 1. At our second open house, we narrowed that priority list down, and it came out as priority number 2. So we heard really clearly throughout the process that figuring out what that connection looks like and that relationship between these 2 really great improvements that are right next door to each other was really important. So through that community engagement, we ended up with an overall sort of design for Rotary Square. We lovingly called this our Petoskey Stone design, again, getting back to our natural feature concept. When you look at it, sort of the aerial view on the right-hand portion of the slide, you can see our sort of askew Petoskey Stone oval there in the middle. Again, the concept here, as you can see, is very green. It's not sort of an urban plaza with lots of hardscape. We have lots of green space and trees. But also we wanted to really be sure that the space carved out individual sort of nooks and crannies in a good way that allowed people to be in the space and be able to visit with folks and spend time, but not necessarily have to be in the center of it all. So I know you all have in your packet a much more detailed design packet, so I won't go through all of that, but just some highlights on the overall design, going sort of clockwise on this slide. On the upper left-hand corner is our sort of welcome to Rotary Square. This is if you're standing at the corner of State and Union and looking southeast over the square. This is sort of that rendering of that entranceway. To the top right-hand side then, just sort of to the left of the first picture, we have the area that is sort of the area that we've sort of focused more on having it be more family-friendly. We also heard really clearly that we wanted Rotary Square to be a place for everybody, but we didn't want it to be a playground. And so there are some features that we've planned, like swing benches. There's a small slide over an overlook area that sort of are more family-friendly, more geared towards kids, but there's sort of a space for that, but it's not the whole square. On the bottom left-hand corner of the slide then is kind of the view if you're looking south down Union Street. So again, this thing that we had tried to navigate is wanting to be sure that we still related well to the street, but also that Rotary Square felt separate, that it was sort of an oasis within the city. And so there are seat benches or seat walls that face the street, but also then there's an opportunity to easily get to Rotary Square that's easily visible where you're not on the street right away. And then the last image in the bottom right-hand corner is sort of in the lawn, looking at the large shade structure to the southern portion, just to the north of the alleyway. That shade structure is designed to be a nice place to be able to sit with movable tables and chairs most of the year, that you can sit there and have lunch, grab a cup of coffee, have a conversation with a friend. It also then is the place to host events or small concerts with all the necessary utilities and things located there. So that all brings us to the sort of topic for tonight, and that is the connection between Rotary Square and the Fish Pass and the existing alleyway, as well as the parking spaces. So the sort of upper left-hand corner of this slide is just the Fish Pass general site plan. Our portion of Rotary Square is the little pink area in the top left of that. And then the right-hand corner, or the bottom right-hand corner of this slide is sort of the rendering looking down the alleyway toward Union Street for what we currently envisioned in our design. And so that shows the removal of those, I think the parking director said 14 spaces. I think we had said 13, so we were off by one. I apologize. But sort of showing removal of those parking spaces, providing that overlook over the river, as well as to be able to see Fish Pass. We aren't proposing removing any vegetation or impacting that slope at all in any way. But then also in the alleyway, we have some removable bollards. So if there's an event, those bollards could be in place to limit vehicular traffic. But if there's not an event, the alley would function just as it does today for vehicles to move through. Because we are now into our design detail work, we do have the alley. There's a curve shown on the alley. All that is we're showing different concrete finishes. The intent there being that the pavement in the alley is different from typical alley pavement. So if you are passing through that space on a vehicle, there's sort of natural recognition that it's a pedestrian space and you should slow down, pay more attention. But again, that would be open to vehicles when there's not an event or some other thing happening at Rotary Square. So that's a really quick overview. I recognize that many of you have been part of other things that we've done throughout the process. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Go ahead, Heather.
And maybe this is a question for Nicole. Can you see how many people are using those parking spaces? I have never parked there in my entire life, but you have, yeah.
In the presentation that I provided, you can see that that revenue is roughly, I think it was $1,300 a year per space. So that's actually higher than per space in Lot B, which it's funny because you look and you don't really see utilization, but when they are parking there, they are parking for longer periods. That lot is typically used by a lot of employees because it is a 10-hour lot.
Okay.
So as far as the actual utilization numbers, it's hard to do. We have to go by revenue per space, and because we can't really see like duration, and we just go by peak months.
Go ahead, Laura, and then Lance.
Quick clarification on that. So when I looked at the notes from the presentation, it looked like the anticipated loss of those spaces was going to be about $22,000. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Lance?
Yeah, you mentioned the vegetation. Well, trees, if we're doing this, are we having to remove trees along the river in order to build this space?
Nope, absolutely not. So as part of the Fish Pass project, a lot of the underbrush on that riverbank was removed. And so there's much more visibility down the riverbank now than there was last year this time. So we aren't planning on removing any trees or vegetation impacting that slope at all.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Jackie?
I know I asked the same question at Planning Commission, but I think it might be helpful for these folks also. Could you describe the ADA accessibility of the amenities at the square, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So the entire site's ADA accessible. Everything has full ADA accessibility. There are ramps. The only place we have any stairs is it's in the sort of background of the picture in the right-hand corner of this slide. That's this overlook section One of the things we heard throughout design was a desire to be sure that we had some elevation in the space. That overlook also has a ramp to it that's ADA compliant.
Thanks.
Thank you. Good question, Jackie, because I forgot to ask that after the DDA one, so. Other questions? Go
Are
ahead,
we
Heather.
just taking questions about the parking, or?
Well, I mean, I think we can,
I-
we're
I have-
trying to focus on the parking, but
Okay,
we
I
can
have-
certainly ask questions about the project since.
I have one question on your final concept drawing. It looks like you've got geese and ducks, or maybe, or a bunch of pigeons in there. I hope that, oh my gosh, I hope that whatever you're planning to plant in there is something that deters geese and ducks.
Yes.
Please, there are certain grasses that do that, so I'll leave that to you, because
Sure.
we don't need any more of that. Ugh. I mean, the open space is horrible sometimes. My other question is, it says in the executive summary that that you developed an operations and maintenance plan. It's not in the packet.
Yeah, correct. So the operation maintenance plan we have with DDA, we're waiting to finalize it until we get through our final sort of design development process and we know exactly what plants are going to be planted and what that requirement is. I don't know, Harry, if you want to speak any more to sort of ongoing maintenance sort of
It's
funding
okay, we
requests?
could just wait for it, but I'm very interested to see that.
So as to the alley and the parking, which, thank you for bringing it back to that too, is, this is us deciding, making a decision if we go along with this, because this is our property that we own, that is what we want to do, to see this improvement to the park access, to see that ADA accessibility. I think we can all kind of conceptualize, if people who have lived here, it would be like a Garland Street situation where it doesn't look like a regular alley. It's going to have those extra kind of features to make it more blurred. So are we all kind of, we'll have it brought back to us, but is there major objection right now? Because that's
have a
something for
question.
feedback too. Lance and then Heather?
Yeah, instead of maybe just like saying, here's the spaces, is there a way that we could at least make the enterprise fund, the parking fund, whole for, the loss of revenue over the next few years through an agreement?
We can do anything we want through budgeting.
Okay.
I shouldn't say that. The world is our oyster through budgeting, I should say.
Thinking we have a couple years left of TIF, and if this is funded by TIF, then can the TIF make the parking fund whole?
That could be a question.
By the loss of the $22,000 of revenue.
That could be a question, certainly. And then Heather and then Jackie.
I'm more inclined to put this off. I don't think that it would matter to the whole building out of Rotary Square to say this is a project for another day. See how it goes at Rotary Square. I like the concept, I really do, but I don't know, we're taking parking. Maybe we just pause for a moment.
Jackie and then Laura.
As I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the current parking spaces are on city parkland, but not designated city parkland. I'd appreciate some help understanding the differentiation and how we go about designating.
I'm not going to speak for Lauren, so I will just reiterate a conversation that we had. It's my understanding that the parking spaces that this would take up is not considered parkland. The parkland's on the other side of the fence on the slope, but I'll let you get confirmation from Lauren on that.
Okay, thank you. And connected with that, I'd like to express my concerns about having a rather ambiguous paved space that sometimes is for cars and sometimes is pedestrians and oftentimes overlaps. That seems fraught with risk to me.
Laura, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, so I'm struggling with the loss of parking spaces, because part of the reason I asked the question earlier about the supply was leading into this discussion. So we're talking about $22,000 in revenue out of over $2 million in metered parking revenue a year. So it's about 1% of the overall parking revenue that we receive from metered spots. And out of the 950 metered spots, we're looking at 14 spots. And I think we just addressed in the earlier conversation that the consensus was we don't necessarily have a supply problem right now. We have a distribution problem and a marketing problem and maybe a wayfinding problem. and maybe a walking problem.
Yes.
So we have some issues, which I think we need to acknowledge, but it didn't sound like supply right now is the issue, at least from the numbers that were presented. So I'm not sure that the supply issue would be a rationale to kick the can down the road. There may be other reasons, but I wouldn't lean on the supply issue or the revenue issue, really, because it's 1%, $22,000 isn't a lot out of $2 million.
The other thing I would add to that is to go, maybe not 20,000 foot, but let's say 5,000, is we also have, Lot O is coming back to us. It's had that kind of earmark on it for years. We might not do anything with it right now. We might not do the broadest plans or not like any of the proposals that are coming over on West Front either. So there's some parking over there that's been taken out wisely by Nicole and her conservative fiscal analysis. But ultimately, we have some other, in that very near region, we have some other spaces that we can really swap around to or look at through a different lens. So I'm always, to the question I think that was asked of can we designate it parkland if it does become park? That's something we could absolutely look at too, so it stays to a point protected, so.
Is Rotary Square designated parkland?
I don't believe so, but it's also,
It's DDA owned.
it's
not city
DDA
owned.
owned, so it's not a
designated
city.
city parkland, it's a GDA-owned property.
Yeah,
But not parkland?
It's not considered city parkland, it's a GDA property.
yeah, so, I mean, we could look at what that means to give it that designation through the city while it's owned by somebody else,
I would
but yeah,
be curious what that looks like, if
Yeah.
it could be designated parkland,
without it becoming city property.
without
yeah.
it be, yeah.
Yeah.
But-
Go ahead,
but
Heather.
I'm going to go back to the delaying this a little bit, because we don't know what Fish Pass is going to look like ultimately. We don't know how people are going to, we just don't know how the access is going to work there. In the meantime, we've got parking, we leave the parking there, we see what happens, it gets closed down for events, we see what happens, and we wait for Fish Pass to finish up, and then this comes back again. It's just a little tiny spot there.
Laura?
Okay, so if we were to delay this, would there be increased costs in looking at this later?
Yeah, so we anticipated this conversation, and when we did our initial cost estimate, we broke Rotary Square into three pieces. One of those three pieces is the alley and the parking spaces separately. Certainly, if you do construction in two phases, it's going to cost more because you have to mobilize all the equipment twice. You've got to do things separately. Anytime you wait any longer to do construction, costs go up. I would say that just to respond to the comment about this not being an integral part, I sort of thought that when we got started. What we heard from everybody we spoke to was quite the opposite. So this was the number one priority in open house number one. It was number two in open house number two by 3 votes from number one. So also with our advisory committee and everybody we talked to, that the not connecting this to the river and Fish Pass was really seen as a missed opportunity. So I just, for what it's worth, we were surprised that it popped as number one when it came, and then we heard that throughout the process.
And this is as an overlook, right?
Yeah.
Correct. So I don't know how well you can see it, but there's a fence there today. You just can't see the fence because it's behind a bunch of brush. But it's essentially exposing that fence, providing a higher quality fence. Today it's a chain link fence. A higher quality fence, opening up that space where the parking lots are and being able to actually see the river, see what is Fish Pass down there, provide that better access, sort of opening up that space, not removing anything on the bank, but just clearing up that space that today is essentially between the back of curb on parking lots, and there's a chain link fence there that's sort of
Do
covered.
you have a direct,
What
question?
is the access? So say I'm sitting back there at that, in the former parking lot, how do I get to Fish Pass? Is there direct access down that alley?
So then the actual Fish Pass research station, we'd kind of be standing in Fish Pass parking lot spaces if this rendering was in the future. So Fish Pass still maintains, I think, 6 parking spaces there, or 8, I'm going to get the number wrong, but there's 6 or 8 parking spaces there for Fish Pass employees. So this rendering is sort of like you're standing in those spaces. So then there's a sidewalk planned, I believe, along that fence. It's a little hard to see on the portion on the top part of that slide. that would connect to that building and then ultimately across the river.
So I don't actually have to walk in an alley where there are cars to go from Rotary Square to Fish Pass?
Well, so to get to Rotary Square from Fish Pass, at some point, you're going to have to cross that alley, whether it's on the sidewalk adjacent to Union Street or through the middle of the alley. We heard loud and clear during the process that the alley had to stay open. One of our original designs was like, just close the alley and make it all Rotary Square. We heard very clearly that wasn't a good option, so this is sort of coming up with
So the
a...
alley is still there? You can
Yes,
drive.
Yes.
and the alley is is the primary access to things like Central Methodist United Church's parking lot.
Yes.
The parking lot by the Women's Library. There are a number of
The unused
private
AT&T one.
parking lots that are accessed from that alleyway.
So people are driving through there all the time.
Well, people are driving through there, yeah.
The other thing I
like
would
every
add
day.
to this discussion is access, the potential access to public restrooms. We have had conversations with Fish Pass in the city about the availability and access to public restrooms at the research facility. No agreement has been made, but we're in conversations, so this would actually provide then direct pedestrian access to potential public restrooms for Rotary Square. As you can see from the design, we don't have restrooms as part of this design. So we're looking at adjacent spaces. That could be one as future plans for the West End parking development mature. There could be a restroom in that design, but we're not there yet. So this would provide access to the Fish Pass, but also potentially a public restroom for Rotary Square.
Go ahead, Ken.
I kind of look at this as an opportunity. I mean, when I see the renderings and I look at the plan, it looks nice, and I think it would be a really appropriate complement for the Rotary Park to have this overlook of the Fish Pass and just kind of tie the two together, which, I mean, it sounds like that was a pretty significant component of the community input. But there is the issue with losing the parking and the money that we'll never see back from that. But I look at it as an opportunity, though. This was a question that I wanted to ask, does the construction of this park have anything to do, or is there any factors involved with the direction of the traffic on State Street? Nothing at all, really?
Nope.
Okay. One of the holdups with the direction of the traffic on State Street was that we didn't know if there would be a cost between one-way and two-way traffic, and that was why we sent that back to staff to find that out. I don't know what that number is, but if the DDA was willing to maybe cover the cost between one-way and two-way, I would be a lot more comfortable surrendering this parking. Like, this sounds like a deal. There's a trade to be made here, an opportunity. I don't know if that's possible.
I'm just
but-
going to say that I would question anybody who would take a $22,000 a year loss and give millions a year in replacement for it, though. Or tens of, hundreds of thousands.
I'm not talking about the total reconstruction of it. There was going to be a cost that was estimated about $500 to $1 million. That's what that progressive AE
Yeah.
study came up with. Somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million to make the modifications to turn State Street into two-way.
Yeah.
And that was with the bump outs and the engineering, and things like that. I'm a little bit more comfortable with, like, it sounds like this needs to happen. This alleyway and surrendering these parking spaces. Is that an option? I don't know if that's something that
Can we make a
we
deal?
like. Can we make a deal?
So the
I don't know
city
if this
gives
is gonna
the-
be.
Takes the parking, gives this property to Rotary Square, basically,
And they pay for the reconstruction on the corners and the bump outs that Progressive AE made those recommendations on. I don't know if that's an option. I'm thinking out loud.
Anything is possible. That's a pretty big swap and ask. And I would also say that horse trading like that is not usually how we resolve parks and public amenities. We're not asking for a multi-use building to be built here that's going to house a new project plus have public restrooms. This is a park for the public. And it just happens to be the only land that the DDA owns. They could just build Rotary Square and not do this, and we're depriving our public, I'm just going to underline this, of access to the Fish Pass that we've just invested a lot in, that we've just spent a lot of time working on. We can choose not to do that. That is our choice. But it's not exactly a favor we're doing to the DDA. It's something we're deciding if we're going to do for the public or not. And so I don't disagree that we can have conversations about funding with it. I think this idea that we owe the DDA owes us for the concept of creating this space is kind of
I just thought it was-
interesting, I guess,
thought
but
it was an
also,
option.
yeah, I would find that to be not very cooperative for the regional cooperation and departmental cooperation we've been talking about going towards. Jackie?
Were there any yes and options pursued that would have different parking configuration, where we maybe split the difference and you have some overlook capabilities and retain some parking?
Tiny.
Yeah, so initially, we had designs that just left the alley as is, and given the strong preference we heard for creating the connection, we removed those designs, right? So certainly if there's a desire to be able to extend, as I mentioned, Fish Pass is maintaining some parking spaces, so, I mean, you could preserve a couple. I think from my perspective, the cost benefit there on whatever the annual revenue was per parking space is probably relatively low, given the benefit of the access and public space with the river. But-
Diagonal and parallel and things like that didn't seem to.
Well, I mean,
Yield enough.
today they're perpendicular, right? They're
Right.
90 degrees, and so those are about as efficient a space as you can use laterally, right? So if you went diagonal or parallel, you're going to be more inefficient in using those parking spaces, so you're not
But
going to
you're
get
gonna
as much.
free up overlook space, potentially.
What's that?
You would be freeing up overlook width between cars and river.
Right.
Just
Yeah, we,
curious.
so I guess to answer your question directly, no.
No.
We didn't do any specific sort of value engineering to try to figure out if we had to fit some parking in here, how could we do that? Certainly, we can. It's just it's an extra expense that happens at this time in the process, if that's something we need to do.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Laura.
I view this as just your traditional cost-benefit analysis. So your cost is a loss of $22,000 in parking revenue, which is less than 1% of the total metered spaces. Your additional cost is the loss of 14 spaces out of 950 metered spaces. Again, a very, very small number. Your benefit is this tremendous benefit to the community in connecting to the river, which came out loud and clear from the community engagement. And it seems to me that parking is not really compatible with the other uses of the park. So for me, it makes total sense. Again, just traditional cost-benefit analysis. You're going to make some, we're giving some things up.
I agree. I'll go along, and also, I mean, this is what the public has,
They said,
this
They
is what
said
they
that's what
wanted.
they wanted.
So
Yep.
we
this-
should listen.
Yep.
We should
So
listen.
if we're going to ask, we
Yeah.
need to listen.
Yeah.
We should
Yep.
listen.
Other final thoughts or comments?
I have one
Go ahead.
final comment. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't publicly acknowledge and thank the Rotary Club for their $1 million gift back in 2018 to celebrate I think it was their 100th anniversary. And I think the Rotary Club has a long history in this community of making community investments, and this is just in that spirit, and it's a tremendous public service, and I think we should acknowledge that tonight and thank them.
Thank you. Agreed. All right, since I did it on the last topics, do we have any public comment on this item? Okay, seeing none, we will now move on to the Northwest Michigan Coalition to End Homelessness, our final agenda item tonight. And Sarah's going to flip one more presentation and move us down the line here. Yeah, it's been perfect, thank you. They are very, actually the mango and the ginger together, I'm like, ooh, now I'm hungry.
Okay. Hi,
Thank
everybody.
you, Ashley.
Sorry, I'm trying to wake back up here. Not that everything wasn't engaging, it's just late. So thank you for having us here tonight for an update on the Housing and Homelessness Task Force. I'm Ashley Halliday-Schmatt, and I am the director of the Northwest Michigan Coalition to End Homelessness, and proud to be here to represent what has been about a year's worth of work so far. I also wanted to start by thanking this board and the former makeup of the board for appointing the city manager to serve on the task force and our leadership team. It's just a true testament to the city's partnership and willingness to tackle this really complex issue alongside of us, so thank you for that. And Benjamin has just been a joy to work with, so thank you. I want to save questions till the end, if that's okay, just because there's a lot of information. It's a year's worth of work. And then also, just wanted to mention that anything that we don't touch on tonight, or if you want to learn more about anything that we'll cover, we have a wonderful website developed by our task force coordinator, Christy Minervini. It's housingandhomelessnesstaskforce.org. So anything you could ever want is there. All right, so trying to get this into about 15-ish minutes. We're going to bucket this work into kind of 3 categories. The why, so why did the task force form? Why was it a good idea for our community? Second, how did we form it? What questions went into both developing the structure as well as the work that would continue over the year? And then finally, what? So what's happening now? What has come out of the work groups? And what are our next steps? So first, the why. Really, bottom line, we need a coordinated, sustainable approach to addressing and ending homelessness in our community. Our county and our city have never had a joint approach to addressing and ending homelessness. It's been very much reactionary when service providers or the coalition comes to you guys or the county board or philanthropy and says, help, this thing is happening. And it was really reactionary. So communities who have addressed this problem really well do it through this type of a model. And we do it through getting past fragmented approaches to things that are strategic, data-informed, and coordinated. So our first taste of that was through the Homelessness Collective. The former Board of Commissioners was updated regularly on that. And out of that, we then stepped into the work to be a little bit more intentional and strategic through the task force. And the goals of the task force, bottom line, develop a unified strategy to address and end homelessness, to address systemic barriers to housing, because we know without enough housing, we will never solve for homelessness. Housing is what helps people leave homelessness. We need to maximize funding and resources both at the state and federal level, as well as the local level. Enhancing service coordination, tracking progress and accountability, incorporating community perspectives and input, and I'll get into that in a second, how we did that. And then finally, advocate for policy solutions. So tonight you'll get kind of your first look at the recommendations that are coming out of the task force. Some of those have budgets that will be associated with them in the final document, and some won't. Some will be policy reform that we can partner with you all to make real progress. These are some of the questions that we asked ourselves as part of the leadership team when forming the structure of the task force. Really all the things you would think of, who needs to be at the table, who have we always wanted to work with on this issue, but never had the opportunity to, what resources would be able to leverage the work in a better way, what other creative strategies are other communities using, and then finally, if this is successful, what can we expect in the years to come? This was the structure we used for our task force. I'll start at the top. We have our leadership team, and that's the team that has the decision-making authority. So we have the county administrator, we have city manager, myself as director of the coalition, and Christy Minervini, our task force coordinator. We have Sakura Takano from Rotary Charities, and then Ryan Hannon, a subject matter expert who's also leading outreach at Central United Methodist. From there, we have the Task Force Advisory Council. So everyone on the leadership team, as well as the chairs of the working group, met to form the Advisory Council, and it also consisted of other stakeholders and community leaders. The Advisory Council's role is really as a consultant and to give us feedback. The working groups would share what they were working on, ideas that were coming out of their groups with the Advisory Council, and then they'd get feedback on that. And then finally, the working groups. So the working groups were made up of frontline staff actually doing this work day in and day out, as well as other director level positions that impacted this work. We had safety net services focusing on crisis management and prevention work, emergency shelter and services, focusing on day shelter services, housing navigation, and emergency shelter, and then housing solutions, focusing on development of deeply affordable housing. So that's housing for folks making 0 to 30% of the area median income, as well as the support services needed for permanent supportive housing for our most vulnerable neighbors. Quick look at our 12-month timeline. Excuse me. Really, a lot of work happened starting in May with the work groups. They met over the course of the summer and the fall. We had some listening sessions along the way, public feedback sessions, and then finally here we are giving our update. And then in the coming month, we'll have the final strategic document, as well as hopefully some more sessions where you can engage with the results. This is our meeting schedule. We held over 50 meetings between May and December of 2025. The things I want to highlight here are the listening sessions. Christy, our task force coordinator, did a beautiful job of hosting 3 listening sessions with people with lived experience of homelessness. So that was either at Central United Methodist Church during their breakfast, Jubilee House during outreach hours, or at the Goodwill Inn, talking to folks actually living on our streets and in our shelters, talking to them about what changes need to be made within the current system and what do they need to end their experience of homelessness. And then finally, we had 2 public feedback sessions, which many of you attended, so you've already heard a lot of the spiel. So along the way, we were very committed to inclusivity and transparency. You all were receiving monthly progress updates. We had consistent check-ins with city and county staff. We had our overview documents, and then finally our website where everything lives. So here's our leadership team. Again, reminder here, the plan, the role of the leadership team is really the decision makers related to the resource allocation and the recommendations coming out of the work groups. The working groups, let's see, what do I want to highlight? Oh, our co-chairs. I just wanted to highlight kind of that cross-section of support we had. So Safety Net Services was actually co-chaired by a city staff person, one of our Traverse City Police social workers, Jennifer Holm, Bailey LePan, our Goodwill Outreach Manager. And then Emergency Shelter and Services was co-chaired by Dan Biron, the Executive Director of Goodwill Northern Michigan, and Pat Livingston, the Board Chair of Safe Harbor. Housing Solutions co-chaired by our Traverse City Housing Commission Executive Director Carl Fulmer and Becca Binder, who was the former Executive Director of Northwest Michigan Supportive Housing. Already talked about the Advisory Council. And then finally our recommendation template. So every time the working groups were coming up with recommendations that they would want to bring to the Advisory Council and then hopefully the leadership team, we took every single recommendation through this template, talking with the group about if it passed our recommendation funnel, which I'll get to, what does it mean in practice, what's already in place, what are the gaps, and what would implementation and success eventually look like. The recommendation funnel was really key because the work to end homelessness isn't something that we make up. Like, there's a proven way to do this that other communities have successfully done. So wanted to really funnel that in so it wasn't a throw every idea at the wall. It had to be something that was data informed and achievable by either the nonprofit community, the city, or the county. Needed to align with our task force goals and our Housing First principles, leveraging partnerships without harming anyone. And by anyone, I mean the people that we have the privilege of serving, the people in our neighborhoods, our constituents, and then also the nonprofit and business community. Will it benefit multiple stakeholders, and are the outcomes measurable? And from that, we got these. So from the discussions and the work group meetings, taking it through Advisory Council and the leadership team, we eventually came up with these recommendations. The leadership team then read that template for every single recommendation and used an Eisenhower matrix to rate the importance and the urgency for each recommendation. And this was the first look at that. I'm not going to spend, we don't have enough time to go through every single one of these, but essentially what happened, emergency shelter and housing development and supports rose to the top. That was not a surprise to anyone who's been doing the work for a really long time or who has lived in this community for over a couple years. We need more housing and we need a sustainable funding plan and service provision model for our shelter system. From those 14 recommendations, we narrowed it down to 8, and this is very recent. So if you came to the public feedback sessions in January, still a draft plan, the leadership team narrowed it down to really 8. And so those will be the ones I'm covering tonight. We heard in the public feedback sessions 14 was too many, and then we also heard there's duplicative information in some of those. So these are the ones we'll cover tonight. Recommendation group 1 is out of Safety Net Services. Again, Safety Net Services really focusing on preventative efforts to stabilize and strengthen the safety net so that we can stem the inflow into homelessness. To end homelessness, we need to make sure folks are not coming into homelessness at a high rate and that they're also leaving to housing. So this is focusing on the inflow. Recommendation out of this work group to strengthen coordination, system navigation, and outreach to reduce inflow and returns to homelessness. So really talking about refining the housing navigation system, doubling down on our diversion efforts, and having a well-coordinated system, reducing the amount of time people are in homelessness. Next, investing in targeted prevention and housing stabilization to reduce first-time homelessness or returns to homelessness. We know the only predictor, or the greatest predictor of long-term homelessness is becoming homeless that first time. So are there targeted prevention efforts that we can leverage to make sure that that's not happening at a high rate in our community? Next, housing solutions. This work group, again, was focusing on expanding and sustaining housing solutions that actually end homelessness. Recommendation 1, aligning local financing tools and development incentives to increase the production of that deeply affordable housing I mentioned earlier. So housing for people making 0 to 30% of the area median income. And that could include the use of innovative financing mechanisms and homelessness-informed developer incentives during project planning. An example of this is kind of happening right now at the city level, and we look at it as a success with the Housing Commission allowing for units set aside for 0 to 30% AMI for the new, I'm going to get it wrong, Copy Central, Copy something project.
8th Street.
City View.
There we go. Thank you. I should just ask Mitch, board member. So that is an example of that and something we can point to as an early success. Next, stabilizing and expanding permanent supportive housing by both maintaining the existing HUD-funded permanent supportive housing, because we know right now that funding at the federal level is at great risk. So what does that look like to keep those units online in our community, while at the same time developing new deeply affordable units and investing in integrated care supports? So another early success we're seeing is in collaboration. We have addiction treatment services, our permanent supportive housing providers, and Munson Healthcare all at the same table continuing conversations about a better integrated care support model for folks in PSH. And then finally, out of Housing Solutions, advance zoning and land use policies that allow for increased density and flexibility to support that deeply affordable housing development. And then our final recommendations are coming out of the Emergency Shelter and Services Work Group. The goal here, I want to be pretty explicit on what the goal is, not necessarily what the outcome might be, but the goal was to improve crisis response systems to ensure immediate, safe, and supportive emergency shelter, including enhancing emergency shelter, day services, and housing navigation efforts. So some of the outcomes in the recommendations that we'll talk about, they point back to the goal, but the goal wasn't, I think sometimes it's, there's a misconception that the only goal of this was to do something about shelter. And really, this was the goal around shelter. So the big audacious goal out of emergency shelter and services is to maintain year-round shelter operations while planning for the consolidation with key partners such as Safe Harbor, Goodwill Northern Michigan, and the Community Cares Coalition for 24/7, 365-day shelter with 165 shelter beds. Likely, the most feasible option is at Keystone Road on the current Goodwill Inn site. If this proves unworkable or unfeasible, other alternatives could include a new location or adding 30 beds at Safe Harbor's current facility. The group, I also want to add here, this is another success in collaboration that we're finding. This group is still meeting. So even though the task force working groups have officially kind of ended, the work around this recommendation still continues, and this group continues to meet and collaborate on what this could look like. Next, create a sustainable budget and funding plan for emergency and day shelter services. The working group has made it very clear that recommendation number 1 here cannot move forward without sustainable budget planning and funding from both the city and the county local units of government. And then finally, developing and adopting consistent service standards across emergency and day shelter services to ensure high-quality, trauma-informed, equitable, and housing-focused service delivery. And here I just want to emphasize the housing-focused service delivery. Without that, we run the risk of overbuilding shelter without exit strategies to housing. So we have to do 2 things at the same time. And then finally, our next steps. The leadership team is continuing to meet. I believe we're going to meet 2 or 3 more times. That will include the development and the, getting a final strategic direction document together, present it to all of you, and create the implementation plan for the adopted recommendations. Again, tonight, these are all draft recommendations, and they will conclude with a budget for the ones who need a budget, or funding requests associated with them, and then the implementation strategy.
Thank you for covering a lot in the promised 15 minutes. You did great. All right, open it up for questions from the commissioners. Jackie?
Sure.
I saw you about to speak. It's okay.
I'm particularly interested in the housing supports. And
Sure.
it seems as though you've established sort of a 3-legged stool, one of which is zoning and land use. And I'm hoping that we're sensitive to the fact that Traverse City has very recently, within the last 2 years, essentially doubled via zoning changes their dwelling capacity within our limited acreage. And I'm hoping that you might consider a 4th leg to the stool, which would be looking at property tax policies and incentivizing actions. We've had some reports from the Planning Commission that the uptake based on density zoning that was implemented 2 years ago has been tiny. Like 15 building permits pulled in the last 2 years against that new capacity.
Sure.
So I fear that without doing something different, that you may not reach your objectives.
And Jackie, for clarification for me, do you mean by that like investigating and supporting like the attainable housing or brownfields or things like that, or?
You know, any tools related to how we charge property taxes to people. Generally, if you want to incentivize action, you spend some money, and you know that some of the statewide options that Lauren has brought to us, for instance, that offer breaks on property taxes for small scale potential new landlords. You know, if that can be baked into this, I would be really happy.
Great. And I do know that's coming back to us in a couple of weeks too, the attainable. So yeah. Go ahead, Mitch.
Yes. obviously it would have a lot of pieces that would have to line up, but if it's decided to have a single unified shelter at Keystone or somewhere else, is there what you see as a path forward with township planning and zoning, which I understand had been a hurdle in the past?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, the current site sits in Garfield Township, and we have had some very preliminary conversations with the township, but that's on the list to work through. We're actually considering bringing in a consulting firm to help us through the feasibility study for a consolidated shelter, and that would be included in that work.
And another aspect of that is, yes, there is some economies of scale and better ability to provide services to people at one location as opposed to two or multiple. But Keystone, or if it's at some other locations outside the city limits, is farther away from major employers. It's farther away from the hospital. It's farther away from many service providers that aren't making an in-person visit. So would another piece of that puzzle being dedicated bus service or other transit solution?
Yep, great question. Yes, so transportation is one of the key factors that we're looking at when we think about moving that out. Bottom line, to move a shelter and consolidate that in not a high, in not the city, we need to think about, is this best for the people we're serving? And so we would never do that without ensuring transportation. That has come up every single time we talk to anyone, is what's the transportation plan? So definitely in our next steps in implementation to talk to Beta. The other thing I want to also remind people of, the Goodwill Inn has been operating at that site, providing over 100, I don't know how many, over 100 emergency shelter beds for over 20 years. So we do have transportation for the folks who utilize that shelter every single night already. It would increase the use, and we would need to talk to Beta about expanding it.
Great. Lance?
So it might be a little premature. The 24/7, 165 bed facility is quite significant. I just have to always ask the question, what is an idea of a projected capital cost and operating costs? And I know that was on kind of a, must-have, right? Number 2 was finding that funding source. And I guess my second question to that is there a share the city that you guys thought of as the city expected to contribute versus the county and the state and philanthropic partners? Just wondering about that.
Great question. So ultimately the document that will come out of this will include budget estimates. What we're currently looking at right now is a shared cost between the city and the county, because we look at emergency shelter as a critical part of kind of the infrastructure of our community, whether it's in the township or the city. So shared cost there. We already receive, I want to say we receive around $350,000 a year from state grants. There are no current, other than contracts with the VA, there are no federal funding sources available for emergency shelter. That could change, though. The administration could change that. So we're already kind of maximizing federal and state resources. And then the estimates we're looking at, we're still talking, we're actually providing those estimates to Benjamin and Nate, I believe, this week. But we're looking at a shared cost of about $750,000 a year of each entity to make of $1.5 million.
Okay. And just a follow-up question to that. Have you explored the idea of private endowment or philanthropic contributions to endow a fund that could then go towards this?
Yeah, endowment has been discussed. there's different views on that. But yes, that's a great idea that has been discussed for the ongoing sustainability. As far as the capital costs go, that I don't believe that's been discussed for the capital costs. We've been told that private investors will be funding the capital costs.
Oh,
That's nice.
private investors.
Great. Other, Ken and then Heather?
Ashley, thanks for all your work. I know it's really hard. Thanks, Christine. Thanks, Dan. It is truly thankless work. You mentioned Jen and Brad, our resilience team officers with the
Yes.
city. You know, moving them to budgeted positions rather than just grant funded was one of the most important things that we did. And when we start talking about coordinated long-term funding strategy, I know a lot of people get squeamish when we start talking about how are we going to spend tax dollars to address the unhoused, the homeless issue. But I absolutely look at that money as we're spending money on prevention rather than dealing with it after the fact. It costs, we're spending money on prevention, which is cheaper than it is to react to a lot of these type things. This is money that's not spent on first responders. This is money that's not spent taking someone up to Munson. You know, if we get these people in housing, I think it's important. So I appreciate all your work. I know it's hard.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
Ken. Heather, go ahead.
I echo Ken. Thank you very much, Ashley, Christy, Dan, Ryan, Jen, all the, now, this is an update. You've got a few more things to do. Do you anticipate coming back with something final along with the budget, like in the summer, the fall, of next year?
Part of our budget process, right?
Yeah, in the next couple of months.
In the next, wonderful, okay. And I have to ask, what happens this summer? I mean, I know that's not really part of your scope, but, and maybe it's an inappropriate question,
No,
maybe.
that's fair.
But what are we doing this summer?
Yeah, so we still have year-round operations funded at Safe Harbor for the summer. And I know Safe Harbor is in preliminary talks with, I believe, at least the city, I'm not sure about the county, for 2027-28 funding. But this summer, we're funded and operational.
And Jubilee House is also funded.
I'm not,
I think they were funded through the end of our fiscal year. So,
through the end of April,
Oh,
I'm
end of
hearing
April.
Okay.
my Jubilee whisperer.
sorry, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, so that'll probably be coming to us in some, or we'll be hearing about it. Yep. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you.
Laura?
I think it's going to be really important in terms of the timing of these additional next steps in the strategic document to have a specific funding request introduced to the commission during our budget process. Because clearly, as a community, we have multiple competing priorities, and I think it's going to be, it's really important that that comes so that we can evaluate that request within the context of our full budget.
Okay.
I think Benjamin, because he is part of that leadership team, has mentioned that that will be brought to us as part of this in the past. So to kind of tie those up back together.
Yep.
Other questions right now? Well, thank you so much. A lot of
Thank
great
you.
work done over the last year. You guys have worked very hard on this and brought together a lot of groups that, and a lot of solutions that I think everybody was always, I always say this, it's a good idea when everybody at the end is like, why weren't we doing that before? It's not,
Right.
it's not a fault that we weren't doing it before. It's
Right.
a great idea of how well it worked together when we can ask that. So thank you all for doing that and,
Thank you,
and bringing
guys.
this to us now. And we look forward to seeing what comes next and helping out. All right, in the interest of time, I'm going to open up general public comment right now. So sorry, this one isn't getting its own. So if you have comments on this or anything under the sun, feel free to approach. Go ahead.
Justin Reed, city resident. In this study session, the recommendation presented by Northwest Michigan Coalition to End Homeless is a good start. It's a great start. But recommendation 1 has an issue, as always, where, moving the shelter somewhere. Where in Traverse City would that be? Can someone say they have a solution in TC that matches with the master plan zoning, but do the neighborhood associations want that moved in their backyard? The biggest barrier for many folks who are homeless is finding housing. The problem is twofold: not enough housing, building density, and lack of housing coordination in TC because of the MISHDA general waiting list not open for housing choice vouchers, or HCV for short. But when the list opens, a limited window getting the paperwork is a headache and a barrier. TIFMA is the current Public Housing Authority, or PHA for short, according to MISHDA's website. The TIFMA is divided by a west and east side of the peninsula. The east side has an office in Gaylord, but the west side has none. Unless you have a vehicle, it takes about 3 to 5 days to get the package through the post office. I do not see them on the website or underneath the Housing Solutions Work Group or in this PowerPoint at all. And just to expand on the whole entire county thing, the county has its own issues right now, especially with the infrastructure that they're dealing with the county and jail. So they're going to be strapped with money. And also with the Northwestern Michigan Supportive Housing, that continuance of care for HUD, that's being cut. So even if there is work being done, the issue and problem is trying to get that coordination out to finding housing. And if those solutions are, with the House Choice Voucher Program, again, if you don't have a vehicle, you have to wait for the mail, you have to go through this hoops and red tape and everything else to get things done. And if there's no communication coming back to you, how's that can alleviate your housing situation? You might become homeless with your housing situation because of the not communication back and forth. So that's just something. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Any other public comment at this time? Seeing no takers, I'll bring it back. Any final comments from the commission? Go ahead, Ken.
With the weather being so nice outside, I was able to go to Ashton Park and check out the reconstruction. We didn't do a ribbon cutting for that park yet, but my 2 oldest daughters, I asked them to evaluate it, and they gave it high ratings, which was a 6.7.
Oh, great. Of course.
For real. So it was, the park's great.
No parent can hide from the 6.7, right?
If you know, you know.
Thank you. We appreciate the very public funk endorsement of that, so thank you.
Highly endorsed it.
Any other? Well, thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of this beautiful evening, and we'll see you next week.
And see Lance run.
Have you seen that there's some...
That was funny.
Maybe they're trying to put it into this...
These are good. They almost made me hungry, though, because ginger and mango together are good curry flavors and certain dishes. Oh, hey,